going to go ahead and get us kicked off here. So my name is Dr. Rebecca Mears, and I'm a member of the VIN Foundation student team. I'm really excited to have you guys join us tonight for our 4th annual class of 2022 Student Loan Playbook. This is one of my favorite events that we do throughout the year, so I'm really excited to have everybody join us and kind of get started here. A couple of housekeeping things, then I'll turn it over to Dr. Tony Bartels, our presenter for the evening. It seems like most people have been able to find the chat. If you can't find that, there's a button down at the bottom of your screen. You can open that up. I do encourage you to make sure that your settings are set to everyone and not just hosts and panelists, so we can all see you there. If you have any technical issues throughout the evening, please feel free to put those in the chat so we can help you troubleshoot. We do try to keep that chat window just for technical issues and sort of some answers to some questions, but we try to reserve your questions for the Q&A, which you can also see down at the bottom. It's in between your participants and your chat buttons down there. That's where we'll ask you guys to place your questions for the evening. We'll have a couple of features there. You can anonymously post if that's how you're more comfortable asking. And then you can also upvote or thumbs up those questions so we can see which are the most popular questions and kind of make sure that we're prioritizing those throughout the discussion. All questions will be answered tonight, and there are no silly or stupid questions. We're here to help, so please feel free to ask whatever's on your mind. Some of the questions will be answered live, some will be answered in the Q&A, and then we'll also have some time at the end for any remaining questions as well. So make sure that you get those questions in there and utilize that feature. This is something you'll hear kind of a couple times throughout the night, is there will be a recording of this webinar, and it will be sent out to you in the next coming days. That will be an email from studentaid.gov. We'll also send you a copy of our PDF checklist that time, so make sure that you're keeping an eye out for that email. We've got a couple people here in the background that I just want to introduce real quick. We've got VIN Foundation Executive Director Jordan Benshia, as well as Charnette Lewis and Dr. Matt Holland. So they'll all be answering some questions for you and helping out with everything. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Tony Bartels and get us started. I know we've got a pretty packed evening, so let's get started.
Great. Well, thank you, Becca. And thank you everyone who is joining and in the midst of traveling and also contributing some locations and such there. I'm going to ask you guys to type in the chat quite a bit tonight. So hopefully that won't be too hard for you. It looks like you already got that down. So this is also one of my favorite ones of the year to do too, because we get to actually talk exactly about what to do with your student loans. And since you all have graduated and most likely know where you're headed next, we don't have to play with just theoretical numbers anymore. We get to play with actual numbers, which is great, right? Because that now we get this, kind of the rubber meets the road, and you get to see how this is going to play out for you. And I know there might be some anxiety about how to exactly make the best decision, but that's why we're doing this, right? So that's why we're going to go through and actually walk through the steps that you can take to analyze your student loans, apply for a consolidation, apply for a repayment plan, the pros and cons of those sorts of things. And if you have questions about those, or a lot of this is where I guess this is where the deal making starts, right? So I do see, and as students, you're typically like, okay, this stuff is kind of confusing. It's very stressful. Not really sure what to do, but hey, I've got to pass NAVLE, so I'm not terribly worried about it right now. But now that you're graduated and you're heading to your first positions very shortly here, or you're on your way to them now, we really need to talk about what the repayment plan is you're going to use. And that usually spins off well, what if I want to do it this way? Or what if I want to, pull a little bit from column A and a little bit from column B? I mean, so you guys actually turn into pet owners, right? So maybe you don't know that yet, but kind of when the pet owners are in your exam room and you present to them what you think the best treatment plan is, they're going to start deal making with you, right? Well, maybe I can't do that plan, but can we do a little bit of this and a little bit of that? And that's what I see a lot of you guys doing with the student loan repayment strategies too. to start. And unfortunately, with a little bit of this and a little bit of that doesn't always work very well with your student loans, right? So we're going to talk a lot about that tonight too. So you can, get started with that best foot forward and then adjust as your circumstances evolve, right? I want everybody here to have their career path pan out exactly as they see it right now, but sometimes that doesn't happen. Right. So you want to also make sure that you're adequately prepared to not only navigate those twists and turns that we can see in the first couple of years for a veterinary professional, but also want you to think about things other than your student loans. So you're not missing out on some valuable time for some of the critical financial wellness items that we're going to be talking about as well. So rather than talking about them in the abstract, let's go ahead and dive in and talk about what we're going to cover tonight. So, you can't manage what you don't measure. So some of you and those of you that submitted the student debt and income signament form, thank you, right? Because that is really this first step to gathering all of the information that's going to be required to decide on a student loan treatment plan. Right. So that is all of that stuff that we ask you in that debt to income signament. Is not because I'm nosy. It's because those are all of the pieces of information that are relevant to wading through the best repayment plan for you. Some of that is going to depend on the loan types we find, right? Which is why we need to take a real close look at the student loans that you're carrying around. Those student loans will be associated with various repayment options depending on the loan types you have and when you started borrowing. And then also that leads us to, well, I have I've got a laundry list of options. Which one do I pick, right? So which is the best one for you, right? Because the best one for you may not be the best one for another person. If you are going to use an income-driven plan, we do have to talk about the application process and the renewal process. A little bit of that is up in the air because of the pandemic forbearance. We're going to talk about that tonight as well. You guys are now the third class to graduate into this very unusual pandemic forbearance period that federal student loans have been in for a little over 2 years now. There are going to be side effects regardless of the treatment plan that you decide on. So whether you want to pay the loans back as fast as possible, whether you want to pay the minimum, plan for any tax on forgiveness, or maybe you're working towards public service loan forgiveness, or maybe you're still going to be one of those people that wants to do a little bit of column A and a little bit of column B, right? There's going to be side effects associated with all of those choices. And what I want to help you do is identify those side effects and minimize them to the extent possible. Right, because I generally just hate to see people spending more on their student loans than they have to, because they're generally missing out on opportunities to increase their overall financial wellness outside of their student debt. Which is going to bring us to the thinking beyond student debt component of the session, where we're going to talk about those critical financial wellness items that hopefully some of you have either already started taking advantage of with maybe some of those graduation gifts or signing bonuses or whatever, or you're at least thinking about how you're going to start them and when you're going to start them. We are going to take a clinical approach to this, right? So the earlier stages and using your student aid data file and working through that debt and income signament form, that's kind of that minimum database so we can do a physical exam and diagnostics on your student loans. And then from what we find in there, we're going to talk about prescriptions and treatment plans. We've already addressed the pandemic forbearance period, but for those of you that aren't aware, it was extended for, I think, the 6th or 7th time now, and the most recent extension runs through the end of August, right? So there's no interest that will accrue. Even if you end your grace period and enter a repayment plan, no payment will be due until at least September, and there's a really good chance we may see that extended beyond that, right? But we have to kind of wait for confirmation of that to see if that will actually be the case. I thought these were a few really good questions that you submitted in your signalment forms that I think sum up exactly what we're going to cover here tonight. So this one down here, when, how to begin paying loans. We're going to talk exactly about that in the early parts of this. Which plan is best for my situation? Exactly right in the wheelhouse of what we're going to cover tonight. And how to manage loans when potentially applying for public service loan forgiveness. And we'll definitely talk about public service loan forgiveness for those of you that think that might be part of your career path. This is a good example of kind of the anxiety around how do I make a decision, right? I want to pay the loans back quickly to avoid high interest, but not at the expense of quality of life, right? And the good news is you don't have to, right? There's no scenario here where you have to sacrifice quality of life just for your student loan repayment plan, but it's up to you, right? So it depends on how you choose to approach your student loans. Another good one, I don't want to sacrifice saving for the future and utilizing the time aspects of my investments, but I also don't want to pay unnecessary money in interest towards my loans if I have the money available to just go ahead and pay them off, right? So a lot of really good concepts in there. You know, we're gonna have to talk more about this if I have the money available part, right? What does that mean? How much do you have available? How much impact will it have on your student loans? And will it ultimately prevent you from reaching student loan forgiveness under a plan like pay as you earn, right? Because that will all determine whether or not it makes sense to use any extra money you have in your budget to pay extra towards your student loans, or to take that extra money and put it towards other financial wellness items that can compound on your behalf, grow over time, and you'll actually come out with more wealth than if you choose to use that money instead to pay down your student loans, right? So those are the types of things that we're going to be analyzing here tonight. All right, so I asked you guys to provide your student debt and income signalment, so I'm going to give you a little bit of mine. So I'm a married two-vet household, and I finally updated this. So we have a new baby girl as of April 20th. So she's not quite a month old, but this is Lucy, and this is one of our, what I refer to as our Labradoodle doodlebugs, Maggie, and Maggie has kind of officially or unofficially claimed her as her own. So it's been funny to see how the dogs interact with the baby, but Maggie is really, I mean, she's never more than, you know, a foot away from Lucy at any given time. And whenever she makes a peep, she's the first one to run over to her and see what's going on. So it's really interesting to see how these how these animals interact with the human infants. But both of my wife and myself are both veterinarians. We have a boatload of student debt. I was a career changer coming to veterinary medicine and had a prior background in corporate finance. So I was kind of a numbers geek, and I really tried to avoid all of the student loan stuff as much as possible, but you know, as we all learn, it's pretty impossible to completely avoid it. And then I met my wife in veterinary school, and she had even more student debt, or has even more student debt than I have. So combined, we have student debt in excess of $400,000. And you know, we're actively managing this, and we're currently using an income-driven repayment strategy. And that's because if you guys do nothing, right, and provided that this pandemic forbearance period ends as scheduled at the end of August, once your grace period expires, if you don't do anything with your loans between now and that end of the grace period, your loans will automatically be placed into a standard 10-year repayment plan. And a standard 10-year plan is a time-driven plan, right? So the time-driven plans take your principal, they're going to add your interest to that principal, they're going to use the interest rates that are associated with your student loans, and they're going to calculate a monthly payment that is designed to pay that balance to zero in 10 years. Right, so it's going to be a level, what they call level, or the monthly payment will be the same for that 120 month period. And once you hit that 120th payment, the loan balance would be gone. Right, but the problem with the time-driven plans is they don't care what your income is. Right, so for us, with a $400,000 student loan balance combined, if we wanted to pay based on the standard 10-year plan, our minimum payment would have been $4,500 a month, which was more than we were earning. Right, and it'll be more than some of you are taking home, right? So that isn't going to work, right? So we had to look elsewhere to see what our alternative options would be. Stumble upon these income-driven repayment plans, right? So IBR, income-based repayment, is a specific type of income-driven repayment plan. As the name implies, the payments are a function of your income, right? So instead of $4,500 a month, our payment was $1,400 a month, right? Much more manageable. As time went on, a new version of an income-driven repayment plan was introduced by the Department of Education called Revised Pay As You Earn. That happened in 2015, right? So we crunched the numbers and decided that it was going to make the most sense for us to switch from IBR to Revised Pay As You Earn, and that got our payment down to $930 per month, right? So much more manageable monthly payment, allows us to have a financial wellness plan and strategy that involves something other than paying down our student loans. However, as some of you are going to notice quickly here, if I'm making payments of $930 a month on a $400,000 balance at whatever the student loan interest rates are, right, that's probably not going to cover the interest that accrues each month, right? So our loan balance has actually been growing during this time frame, right? We're still considered to be current and in good standing on our student loans, right? And if we continue to make payments based on our income and we hit the maximum repayment period for revised pay as you earn, the maximum repayment period is 25 years. Many of you are going to have access to pay as you earn, a plan that my wife and I are not eligible for. Pay as you earn has a maximum repayment period of 20 years, right? So the way these programs are set up is you make payments based on your income for that maximum period of time. And if you still have a balance remaining at that maximum repayment period day, the remainder is forgiven, right? But that forgiven balance can be treated as taxable income, right? So if we think we're going to have to pay a tax on that, we're going to do our best to guess what that is in the future. And we're going to use the time between now and when that forgiveness is triggered to save for that potential tax, right? And that's exactly what my wife and I are doing. We are about 70+%, give or take, right? It depends on the week now with our forgiveness plan and what the stock market's been doing. But we're about 70% to our forgiveness goal with about 15 years before we would hit forgiveness. Right now, there's a chance that we won't hit forgiveness, right? If our income increases and our payments increase and we end up paying the balance to zero before we hit forgiveness, then we wouldn't have to worry about any kind of tax. You can still end up paying your balance to zero before you hit any kind of forgiveness with an income-driven plan. But chances are, right, just kind of playing the odds, chances are it's likely that we're going to hit forgiveness in the next 15 years. So we're planning for it. So the pandemic forbearance benefits for those of us that have been in repayment, you all have been experiencing it as interest not accruing during school, which has been extremely beneficial, particularly for your graduating class, right? Because you've had the majority of your veterinary education not accrue interest during veterinary school, which is abnormal, AB normal, right? So that is not how this usually works, right? But many of you have saved tens of thousands of dollars of interest during this special pandemic forbearance period just on interest accrual during school alone, right? So that's been a huge benefit for you. But for those of us that have been in repayment, they've also turned the payments off. So our payments have been off for 2+ years, no interest is accruing, and they haven't, and they also counted the time towards forgiveness, right? So it's not going to extend the amount of time that we have to pay on our student loans. It's actually kind of fast forwarded our loans towards forgiveness, if you think of it that way, right? So our balance hasn't grown, we haven't had to make a payment, and no interest is accrued, right? But we're 2+ years closer to forgiveness. So it's actually been extremely beneficial for those of us that have been using income-driven repayment during this pandemic forbearance period. This is a shot of my forgiveness savings plan. I started sharing this probably a few months ago just because I see a lot of people have questions about planning for the forgiveness. And so I just figured I'd share my forgiveness plan. And I use, for the bulk of our forgiveness savings, I use a plan or a platform called Wealthfront. So Wealthfront, and it's you know, that one, there's nothing special about that one, it just happens to be the one that I use. There's dozens of these out there, right? So Wealthfront, Betterment, Elvest, Vanguard has their own version of this. Charles Schwab has a robo advising platform as well. I mean, there's literally dozens of these out there. And the concept is, you know, they're low cost. You kind of define your risk tolerance on a scale of, say, 1 to 10, 1 being super conservative. I can't stand to see my balance decrease, 10 being, hey, let's roll the dice and I've got plenty of time to weather the ups and downs. Give me an aggressive allocation of that money across all stocks and bonds, right? So I have mine somewhere around a 7 or 8, which means that I have a lot of exposure to stocks and bonds through index funds that are very low cost. Right, so this doesn't cost me very much. I don't have to do anything but just decide how much money I want to put into it, right? And the platform does the rest, automatically adjust all the investments at the end of the year. It processes my tax documents that are required, and it also tries to minimize my taxes on any dividends and gains that I might appreciate from this particular investment. It works a lot like retirement investing, and some of you are going to get familiar with that as you start jobs that may have access to 401k plans or other types of retirement savings plans. So the dotted line here represents how much we've contributed to it, right? And then the dark solid line is the actual value of that fund, right? And you can see here there's starting to become a significant difference between what we've contributed and what the value of it is, right? So this is the appreciation that I'm experiencing through contributing to this through the growth of the investment over time, and then also the continued reinvestment of any dividends that I receive, right? So you can see here that the difference, or well, maybe you don't realize it now, but I'm going to explain it to you, that the difference here is essentially the appreciation paying for my forgiveness tax, right? So I can reduce the amount I pay in total towards my loans by using time to benefit from the appreciation in the investment and the compound growth of what I have invested here, so I can reduce my overall cost towards my student loans if I end up needing to use this to pay the tax, right? So this is how I'm working towards this. Ideally, I'm going to hit this in the next maybe 5 years or so I can start winding it down, maybe become a little bit less aggressive with it. And then, it leave me some time to adjust if for some reason I have to pay more in taxes than I anticipated, or something else happens where I need to think about contributing more to that particular fund. All right, so I want to make sure that everybody knows how to navigate studentaid.gov, right? So it's not just about, grabbing your file and looking at your student loans anymore. This is also going to be how you apply for your repayment plans. We're going to go through the studentaid.gov website a lot tonight. So I'm going to blow this up. I'm going to log in, but just in case, you opened up the student debt and income signalment form and you got to the question about, hey, can you upload your student aid data file? And you're like, what the hell is that? I'm going to show you what that is, right? So your student aid data file is kind of your log of all the higher education borrowing that you've done with the Department of Education, right? So any interaction you've had using FAFSA over the last whatever number of years you've been in higher education and using student loans will be in here, right? So you can see here, this is the share of my household balance, right? 171,000 total, right? $163,000 of principal, 7,700 is interest, right? We're going to talk about this later. This is unpaid interest. This is what they do if you make a payment under an income-driven plan and the payment doesn't cover the interest. They track it separately, right? And a lot of you had questions about, compounding, right? I need to pay off my student loans because my student loans are compounding, right? I'm going to defer my student loans during my internship or residency because I can't afford the payments, right? Those are not appropriate understandings of your student loans, right? Your student loans do not compound, right? And this is one of the really beneficial aspects of something like an income-driven repayment plan, particularly if your payment wouldn't cover the interest, is that interest doesn't get added to your principal if you do this right, right? And that prevents any compounding from happening, which makes this extremely beneficial, right? Your student loans do not behave like a credit card, thankfully, right? Because that would be nearly impossible to manage, right? So don't treat your student loans like a credit card. They behave differently than that credit card debt does, right? And this will have significant impacts in terms of where does it make sense for you to put your extra money above what your income requires you to pay, right? But that's not even why we're in here. I just wanted you to see the difference here of how that gets accounted for when you're in repayment. I'm going to hit the view details button here, right? That's going to take me to the next page in the student aid file, the aid summary. That's where I'm going to find this download my aid data, right? That's the link I'm looking for. I'm going to click on that. It's going to generate an ugly looking text file that I'm going to save to my device, and I'm going to use that to then upload into the Vin Foundation Student Debt Center. We're going to come back to this later, but while you're in here, we're going to talk about consolidation, right? Just under the managed loans, I can consolidate my loans, right? Here's also where I can apply for an income-driven plan, right? Recertify my income if I'm using an income-driven plan. If I'm married and I'm filing my taxes jointly, my spouse will have to co-sign on that income-driven plan, right? So here's where all of these functions live when you're navigating the specific aspects of repayment. And we're going to come back to that. So definitely we're going to spend a lot of time on that tonight. Okay, so what are we going to find in that file, right? For most of you, it's going to involve direct loans, right? Direct unsubsidized loans, direct grad plus loans. Those are the lion's share of the loans that you have from veterinary school. This was what you guys shared with me that you have of your loan portfolios. And this is pretty typical, right? The lion's share is the federal direct loans. Some of you may even have the older FEL program loans, FFEL, if you were in higher education prior to 2010, right? Or any time during 2010 or before, you may have those federal family education loans that were the precursor to the direct loan program. You want to know if you do have those. Health profession student loans and loans for disadvantaged students. Those are loans that I typically see veterinarians have, right? They are a type of federal student loan, right? Any of you that have these types of loans are really going to want to pay attention to the consolidation section that we're going to cover here. Parent plus loans, unless you're the parent, right, and you took those loans to help pay for one of your child's higher education expenses, those parent plus loans, even if your parents took those to help pay for your education, those loans are in your parents' name, right? And they're not going to be found in your file, right? Your parents will actually have their own student aid data file, right? And parent plus loans are a little bit different beast, right? So they aren't eligible for a lot of the plans that we're going to cover tonight. So if you are helping your parents manage those parent plus loans that they took out for your education, I would recommend that you get your loans, the loans that are in your student aid data file, well under control first before you start attacking those parent plus loans. If you have specific questions about those parent plus loans, feel free to ask and we can go through those, but they are outside of the realm of a lot of the repayment options that you're going to have for your student loans. Private loans, even more different. Right? Private loans are going to be highly specific to the borrower and the contract that you sign with that private lender. They're all different, right? So you're going to want to review those contracts, those master promissory notes, to know what the terms and conditions are for your specific private loan. So we covered the student aid. You're going to find these types, the health profession student loans and loans for disadvantaged students. While they are a federal type of loan, they aren't reported in that student aid file, right? So you're going to have to add them separately or account for them separately when you're considering how to examine your student loan portfolio and ultimately deciding on a repayment strategy. But I'll show you how you can use the Student Debt Center tools to account for those health profession student loans and loans for disadvantaged students. Definitely check your credit report, right? This is a great time to do this, right? So a lot of you are heading off to your first jobs and new apartments or new homes or whatever. Make sure you're checking your credit report, annualcreditreport.com. You want to make sure you didn't forget about any utility bills from veterinary school, or left anything from behind, or that somebody isn't tinkering around and stole your social security number and opened a credit card that you didn't know about, right? So that's going to really help you stay on top of those things. Thankfully, you can pull your credit report at least annually for free from the major reporting entities. During the pandemic, they're actually letting you do that once a week. So make sure you get familiar with what information is in that credit report, so you can identify things that you may not recognize or help you find loans or things that are in your name that you may have lost track of. The banks are going to use those to help determine your credit worthiness, right? So if you find something adverse on there, you want to know before the bank finds out, so you have some time to correct that. And it's also good. It's a good way to negotiate for interest rates on homes and things too. I mean, you want to know what that credit score says. Not credit score, it's your credit history shows, so you can use that as leverage for negotiating maybe a lower interest rate on your mortgage. All right, so these are the interest rates for federal student loans over the last 10 years or so, right? And with the pandemic forbearance benefits, the problem has been that they set them all to zero as a way of kind of accounting for this pandemic forbearance benefit, and it makes it difficult to know what the interest rates are normally. Right. And I've seen that with a lot of the questions, the comments that you all have provided. The interest rates have been off for so long now, you kind of forget, are they fixed? Are they variable? What's the number behind it? What does it mean when interest starts accruing again? So here's what those numbers are, right? These are the interest rates for each of your federal student loan types when you took them. And they are fixed, right? Meaning they don't change. The interest rates don't change. They get updated once per year for folks who haven't started taking them yet, right? So for instance, the people that are going to borrow for school next year, we know what the interest rates will be, and those interest rates will be fixed for the life of the loans that they take next semester, right? But you guys are done borrowing, right? You graduated. So all of your loans are fixed at these interest rates that applied when you took those various loan types. Right, so this is a link to where this chart lives on the VIN Foundation. At this point, I'm kicking myself. We could go back into the My Student Loans tool. I wish we created a function to help you calculate what your interest rate would be. But I'm hoping that just by seeing them, you can kind of get an idea of what your overall weighted average interest rate is for your federal student loans. Right. So I see a lot of wild guesses. Most of you, you're just kind of all over the place, right? 5%, 9%, right? They're probably not 5%. They're definitely not 9%. They're probably somewhere in between, right? Somewhere between 5 and 6%, maybe 6.5% if you're at the higher end of the borrowing spectrum is probably where your overall interest rate is. And then we've got, if those interest rates stay off through the end of August, should that change your repayment plans, right? How does the pandemic forbearance, how do you guys think about utilizing the pandemic forbearance period currently, right? And if you have any thoughts about that, I'd be curious, throwing them into the chat. What is your strategy for taking advantage of the remainder of the pandemic forbearance period, presuming that it ends at the end of August, right? And what might you do to maximize the benefit of that remaining pandemic forbearance benefit here, presuming it ends as scheduled? And then the flip side of that would be, what happens if they extend it again, right? What would you do with your student loans if they extend that pandemic forbearance beyond the August 31st deadline that's currently set? All right. I don't see any comments on that particular pandemic forbearance. I am going to take you guys over now to the VIN Foundation Student Debt Center. So this is where you're going to upload that student aid data file, right? And here you can see I'm not currently logged in. You guys all have VIN username and passwords from having free access to VIN as students. That's still going to continue for another couple of months here. And then, depending on what you're doing after graduation, you'll either still have free access to VIN if you're going on to do an academic internship or residency, or you may join VIN as a member with a discount for new grads. It's a steep discount for the first couple of years out after school. But again, those of you that are doing those internships and residencies may still continue to have free access to VIN. Right, so use your VIN username and password to log into here while you're using the Student Debt Center. You don't have to, right? But it certainly makes things a lot easier in terms of you don't have to keep uploading your file in there. You have access to the student debt message board area, which is where we actually provide personalized assistance for your loan repayment strategies and circumstances. Right, so use that to your advantage, right? So anybody can use this, but the student debt message board area is reserved for veterinarians and veterinary students only, right? So it'll save the stuff that you do in here, so you don't have to keep repeating doing it. Again, it gives you access to that student debt message board area, and you can always use this, right? Whether you're a VIN member or not. Even if your VIN membership expires and you have a post on the student debt message board area, you will still have free access to your student debt area through VIN Foundation, right? So you always will have access to this and the personalized assistance through VIN and VIN Foundation. All right, so now you guys, this is super exciting. You're in this third box here. I have graduated from veterinary school, and I'm going to take that student aid data file and I'm going to upload it into the VIN Foundation My Student Loans tool. So let me find some of the cases that I have here for tonight. So this is a person who has federal and private loans mixed, right? So we can see the balance, we can see the loan count. There's a lot of information in here that you want to wade through, right? So again, 18 loans, not unusual to see dozens of loans that we accrue on our path to and through veterinary school. We can see our loan servicer here is Mohila. Right, we're going to talk about that later too. But here I can get a good idea of the amount that I received, the current principal amount, my unpaid interest, right? This is a really staggering example of how much this person has saved on interest during school, right? On $337,000 of federal student loans, normally when we're not in a pandemic forbearance, I would expect this to be probably 38 instead of 8, right? So probably $30,000, if not more, of interest saved from that pandemic forbearance benefit. We can see the interest rates are shut off, right? That's the pandemic forbearance benefit in place. Probably the next most beneficial tool in here is the income-driven repayment eligibility tab, right? And again, this is a real useful exercise for you guys to go through. We can see here that this person is eligible for the older version of IBR, the one that my wife and I started with, as well as revised pay-as-you-earn. This is a very similar situation to my wife and my student loan scenario. So my guess is this person is probably a career changer, right? So they've, kind of, maybe they had a prior career, took some time off, went back to veterinary school, right? And had some older loans that makes them ineligible for pay-as-you-earn, right? That's one of the first things that I want to see here, because generally speaking, pay-as-you-earn is one of the most beneficial repayment plans out there, right? So my first check is always to see, is this person eligible for pay-as-you-earn, right? Can we consider pay-as-you-earn? If not, right, then I want to know how much of the balance is eligible for revised pay-as-you-earn, right? So when I'm running the simulations, I know to focus on revised pay-as-you-earn versus IBR and not pay too much attention to pay-as-you-earn, right? So that is that's one of the first things that I'm looking for. I've got another example here, somebody that has a little bit less student loans. If the My Student Loans tool will behave and pull up, right? So feel free to do this too. I mean, as long as you're not one of those folks that are actively driving right now, right? Grab your student aid data file, plug it into the My Student Loans tool while we're going through this exact exercise. If you see something in there that isn't quite making sense to you, this is a great place to ask about it, right? Here's another person who wants to head off into an internship or residency, right? Has 25 loans, right? So principal, interest, total owed, all of them are set to 0. I can see I've got some, oh, this one's already paid off. So that looks like it used to be a Perkins loan, most likely. Yep, but that's already gone. So we don't have to worry about that. But we do see a variety of other direct loan types here. If you did still have that Perkins loan balance, right, this would be another great case for why you should consolidate. Looking at the loan servicers, this person has Aidvantage, formerly known as Navient. So income-driven repayment eligibility, same story, right? So another person who's not eligible for pay-as-you-earn, right? So again, we want to make sure that we're eligible for pay-as-you-earn first, right? And if not, then we'll focus on revised pay-as-you-earn and income-based repayment 2009. Oh, let me show you what the student debt message board area looks like. So when you're logged in here, if you have questions, right, and you want to have kind of a formal walkthrough of your student loans and repayment strategy, you can click on the student debt message board area, right? And for those of you that have been on VIN in the past, right, you'll be familiar with the message board area, right? And this is a really busy time of year where we have a lot of new grads posting their student debt and income signalments to get an idea of the best repayment strategy for their circumstances, right? You can see here that you have the ability to post anonymously, right? So there's a lot of personal information that goes into a student loan repayment strategy. We don't want that to be a barrier for you getting help, right? So you can post your circumstances here, follow similarly to the student debt and income signalment form. We'll go through looking at your student loans and helping you determine which repayment plans you're eligible for, what your weighted average interest rate is, right? In this case, this person is 5.65, right? With about $228,000 of student loans. They're currently married, right? We have some spouse income information, right? So all of this is kind of walking through step by step your student loan information, your physical exam, and ultimately your, evaluating your treatment options, your repayment options. Okay, so we have gone through this exercise. Does anybody have any questions about obtaining the student aid data file uploading it into the Student Debt Center, the My Student Loans tool. Generally, I think of this My Student Loans tool as helping me determine which plans can I use, right? So you can choose any plan you want, right? You can stick with the standard 10, you can extend your payment out to 25, 30 years with an extended plan or a graduated plan, or you can use one of the income-driven plans. But the income-driven plans have these goofy qualification requirements, right? So you want to analyze and know which ones that you're eligible to use first, and then we move on to which plans should I use. And that's where the loan repayment simulator is going to help. Right, we start filling in the income side of the equation once we have our debt specifics accounted for, so we can see which ones of those repayment options will rise to the top in terms of our financial strategies. Your interest rates will be zero. You're going to have to estimate those interest rates. When you do start a consolidation, it will reveal the interest rates on all of the loans that you've pulled into that consolidation. So I'll show you that in just a minute here, but the consolidation process is actually one of the areas where you can actually see your interest rates. It's one of the only places I'm aware of right now where you can find those interest rates without actually kind of manually going back and assigning the interest rates based on the loan types and when you borrowed.
Tony, I know one of the questions that we often see about this is you had mentioned that the health profession student loans and the loans for disadvantaged students aren't necessarily going to be in those student aid data files. Where are some of the places, if you could just repeat that again about where people can find those?
Yeah, so your health profession student loans, where you can find those are through your school financial aid account. So normally those are going to live, they're called institutional loans, right? So they're kind of administered through that institution that you were attending. Now, after you graduate, some of those institutions will turn over the management of those loans, servicing them essentially, to an outside servicer. Oftentimes that's Heartland, ECSI, but it doesn't have to be. They just happen to be one of the bigger national servicers for those types of loans. But my guess is if you've graduated within the last few weeks, they're probably held by your school, right? So look in your school financial aid account to see what the balance of that particular loan is, or maybe they've already been moved, right? If they've already been moved, then you're going to have a new account with that new servicer, whoever that might be, that's going to expect payment on those loans once the grace period for those loans for disadvantaged students or health profession student loans ends. And thanks for reminding me there. So let's say that this person also had, I don't know, $10,000 or $16,000 of health profession student loans. This is where you would add it, right? So you hit this add loans button and you would actually enter the details. This is actually a student that we met with yesterday when we met with the UC Davis class. So if I come back over here to this other one, let's say that this person also had $15,000 of health profession student loans. I would add them here, right? And health profession student loans all have a 5% interest rate. So you don't have to worry about entering the interest rate. It's already covered for you. Loans for disadvantaged students also have an interest rate of 5%. But if we add these in here, right, we'll at least account for them in the total. It'll start to calculate a weighted average interest rate because we know what the interest rates are for these, but we don't for these, right? So that's why it'll change it from 0 and show you that funny number there.
We have a question about calculating the average interest rate. How do you calculate the average interest rate? I calculated one that seems to be different from what the student aid is telling me, not to the zeroed one from the pandemic.
So it is a weighted average interest rate. So what that means is that the loan balances that you have that are at a higher balance will play a bigger role in the overall average. So let's say you had $40,000 of student loans at 6% and $10,000 of student loans at 5%. The average wouldn't be 5.5%, right? Because you have a higher amount in the higher interest rate loan. So it's going to be closer to the higher interest rate amount, right? So you can calculate this using a spreadsheet. The consolidation portal will calculate it for you too. But I mean, other than showing you an actual spreadsheet of what this looks like, it's kind of difficult to explain that concept. And I mean, I do have one, right? Because I always have spreadsheets here, right? But this is, this is somebody's portfolio of loans, right? And we've got various interest rates here, right, associated with various principal amounts, which add a weighting factor to the calculation, right? And then we can calculate the overall weighted average interest rate based on the amount of student loans that's here and the interest rate associated with that loan, right? So if you really want to calculate your weighted average and you're not familiar with how that works, I would encourage you to post on the VIN Foundation, on the student debt message board area, or let's go through the consolidation process. And maybe just by revealing those student loan interest rates, it'll help you get a better idea of what that interest rate would be. Plus, they will calculate a weighted average for you as well, right? So when you say that you think that they're calculating it differently or wrong or not really sure what it is, maybe you can tell me if you think it's higher or lower than it should be, and then we can work from there, right? But it really is it's gonna take some number crunching to actually confirm what the actual weighted average interest rate will be for you. Right, but this is the consolidation process, right? And I do encourage every new graduate who has federal student loans to pursue a consolidation loan, right? And here's the reasons why, right? Just in case you end up needing forgiveness, right? Or that you're going to end up hitting forgiveness under public service loan forgiveness, or your income is such, or your debt to income ratio is such that it's quite likely that you're going to hit forgiveness. Starting the forgiveness clock sooner rather than later is always more beneficial, right? The sooner you hit forgiveness, the lower your total cost and the less amount of time you'll spend in repayment, right? And your grace period does not count towards forgiveness, right? So if you graduated last week and you're in your grace period, you're not earning any forgiveness qualifying time until your loans are officially in repayment. Your grace period will never be officially counted as forgiveness time, right? So the only way to end your grace period early and force your loans to get into repayment is using a direct consolidation loan. It will also reduce the number of loans you have, right? So if we come back to this one where the person has 18 loans, right? 18 loans can be difficult to wrap your head around, right? The consolidation will take all of these loans and put them into a single or one or two loans total that you only have to manage that single or two loans going forward, right? The interest rate that they calculate using that weighted average calculation you will experience no difference in the amount of interest that accrues, whether you consolidate or don't consolidate, right? So I see this is where the wheeling and dealing always comes in. Well, I've got one loan that's at this 7.5% interest rate, and I really want to not consolidate that one just so I can pay that one to zero and reduce my overall interest rate. It doesn't matter, right? You're not going to save any money doing that, especially while you're in the lower income phases of your earning career as you're getting started. You've got better things you can do with your money than trying to target one higher interest rate loan versus just consolidating them all, having them qualify for forgiveness qualifying time, forcing that grace period to end early, and then also giving you access to the ability to sign up for the auto pay discount, which will knock 0.25% off your interest rate, right? So consolidate your loans. You'll simplify your portfolio. If the pandemic forbearance period ends on September 1st and you're still in your grace period, you will start accruing interest again, right? And that interest that accrues during the remainder of your grace period will get added to your principal, which means your principal balance can also be higher when you enter repayment. The higher your principal, the more interest you're going to accrue over time. Whether you hit forgiveness or not, you're still going to pay more, right? So consolidating early will prevent any grace period interest from getting added to your principal. The interest that you've already accrued during school is going to get added to your principal no matter what, right? That's just part of starting repayment, right? There's no way to prevent that. And then people want to start wheeling and dealing. Well, what if I pay some of the interest that I accrued during school to reduce the amount that capitalizes on my student loans? Not going to help, right? Most likely you can do better things with that money than trying to pay off the interest before it capitalizes and you enter repayment, right? So consolidate your loans. It also gives you the opportunity to choose a new loan servicer. This is the only chance that you're going to have to choose a new loan servicer, right? So generally speaking, right, now MOHELA is kind of new to the list, at least our recommendation list, right? They took over for Fed Loan Servicing. Fed Loan Servicing quit. So some of the loan servicers will cycle in and out, right? But MOHELA is taking over Fed Loan Servicing's position because they're going to be the official monitor of public service loan forgiveness progress. Public service loan forgiveness requires you to use an income-driven repayment plan, right? So by default, MOHELA is going to have a lot of experience with managing income-driven repayment plans, right? So choose MOHELA. And if you find yourself working for a public service loan forgiveness employer, they're going to move your loans over to MOHELA anyway. So better to move them while you're in this grace period consolidation process now than after you've already started repayment, and then there's a chance for mistakes to get made during the repayment process when your loans get moved from one servicer to another. Right, so choose MOHELA, right? Use this as an opportunity to choose MOHELA, particularly if you have Nelnet, Aidvantage, who used to be Navient. I'm really not seeing any difference between Aidvantage and what Navient used to be, and they were the worst of the worst, right? So I've already seen them providing some pretty terrible information and recommendations to people who have called, right? So I would use that as an opportunity to choose a different loan servicer like MOHELA, right? So you can walk through that particular process and choose them. Now here's the list of cons, and I really have to stretch to find the cons for consolidation, but here's as objective of a list as I can come up with, right? It does require you to do a little bit of work, right? And I'm going to show you exactly what that work looks like here in a second. If you put those health profession student loans and loans for disadvantaged students in there, right, they are normally considered to be what's called subsidized loans, right? Which means that they didn't accrue interest during school, and health profession student loans have a 12-month grace period where they also don't accrue interest. Loans for disadvantaged students have a 9-month grace period where they also don't accrue interest. If you consolidate them, you lose that subsidized feature of those particular loans, right? But in my opinion, that doesn't matter all that much because you want to get advantage of the forgiveness qualifying time anyway. And health profession student loans and loans for disadvantaged students aren't eligible for an income-driven plan or forgiveness by themselves. You have to consolidate them to make them eligible. You do lose the option to target individual loans, right? So if you, again, coming back to I have this one loan that has a small balance and I just want to pay it off first, or I've got this other loan that has a higher interest rate and I don't want to include it in my consolidation because I want to pay that one off, right? You lose that ability to do that. But again, you're not gaining any ground by leaving that out and leaving that ability to do so because you still accrue the same amount of interest whether you consolidate or not, right? And generally speaking, this hunting and pecking, paying back your student loans at different amounts with various amounts of money is not very beneficial, right? Better to pay what your income requires. That will either extinguish your student balance or it won't, right? And dedicate the remaining funds of your budget to more useful areas of your financial wellness plan, right? So those are the list of pros and cons when it comes to consolidating your loans. And now we're going to show you exactly how you can start, right? So your direct unsubsidized loans, and if you have health profession student loans and loans for disadvantaged students, those are usually the rate limiting step to being able to consolidate your loans. They have to be in the grace period, right? And the direct unsubsidized loans usually fall into the grace period almost a day after you graduate. Sometimes they can be a little stickier and take a little bit longer than that, but the health profession student loans sometimes take longer to trigger into their grace period officially, right? And you can't add them to the consolidation until they're officially in their grace period. If you have grad plus loans, they will never hold you up, right? They've been ready to consolidate since you received them. right? Because they're always in a deferment status, which is another eligible status for being considered consolidation eligible, right? So check your loans, check the status, right? So if I come back here, I can see that this person's loans are still in school, right? So as of the end of April, when this file last updated, they are still in an in-school status, right? So I'm waiting for these loans to show that they're in the grace period in order for them to be eligible, right? So once they're in that grace period, I can include them in the consolidation loan. And then I'm going to go to studentaid.gov, right? And that's where we're going to head next. We're going to go to the manage my loans, consolidate my loans. So very similar process. I'll log in here. I can take you pretty far, but I've already consolidated my loans, so they're not going to consolidate them again, right? So, but you can consolidate previously consolidated loans if you have new loans that you've added to your portfolio since then, right? So here you can see it finds my loans that are still outstanding. This is a batch of subsidized loans that I have. This is a batch of unsubsidized loans, right? So that when they consolidate, they will, if you have subsidized versus unsubsidized loans, they will keep those separately, right? So that's how you can end up with two different loans in consolidation, right? They'll separate them into a subsidized category and an unsubsidized category. The interest rates for me were the same because that's what the interest rates were back when I was in school. They were all fixed at that same interest rate, right? So that's the interest rate on each of those batches of loans that I have. Right, so it'll find the ones that are in your file automatically. If you have health profession student loans, if you have loans for disadvantaged students, you will have to add them manually, right? You can add them here using the add loans function. You can find them in the list, right? I believe Q, health profession student loans are Q, right? You're gonna have to find the loan servicer for those particular, right? In most cases, it's probably gonna be other, right? And you'll have an account number when you receive them, the loan amount and the interest rate for those as well, right? But you're gonna have to add those manually to have them included in the consolidation. All right, so this is where the loan servicers like to tell you that you can't end your grace period early, but you can, right? So you can end your grace period early by selecting the do not delay processing option in this processing delay dropdown, right? So this basically says, all right, once we have all of your loans that you want consolidated, ready to go, right? What do you want us to do with that new consolidation loan after it consolidates? You can request that they continue any remaining grace period that you have on those loans, right? But again, that's not very beneficial because if you consolidate your loans and the pandemic forbearance benefit ends and they start accruing interest, then that interest will get capitalized and added to your principal once the grace period ends, right? And again, the grace period does not count towards forgiveness. So we want to check this do not delay processing option, right? I would always just check yes here because you never know where your career is going to take you, right? So just the public service loan forgiveness box, right? And then choose MOHELA, right? So choose MOHELA. They're going to be the official monitor of public service loan forgiveness. Again, that is going to require them to have some really good experience with income-driven repayment plans. Income-driven repayment plans are very beneficial for most veterinarians who are getting started in repayment, right? So that's the general process flow here. Then I'm going to continue. Once you're done with the consolidation, what do you want them to do with the loans, right? Which repayment plan do you want them to put in there, right? So put your tax filing status, right? This should look very familiar. Why are they asking me all of these income questions, right? Because they want to see what your payment amounts might be under income-driven repayment plans, right? But what they don't do a very good job of here is showing you which plans you're eligible for and which ones you're not eligible for, right? I mean, I know that I'm not eligible for pay as you earn, but they still show me a monthly payment amount here, right? So that's not very helpful, right? So these are the other types of repayment plans that you can choose. Standard is the standard 10, right? Graduated is a plan that will set your payment just above your interest accrual each month, and the payment will go up every 2 years. I don't recommend anybody ever use a graduated plan, right? These are the most expensive ways to pay back your loans that are available. And they're generally not very beneficial as compared to an income-driven plan or other extended type of plan. So an extended plan depends on how many months do you want to pay it back over, right? 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, that will depend, that will set the monthly payment for that particular loan. Extended graduated is even worse than the graduated, right? So throw the graduated and extended graduated plans out the door, because they're just the worst repayment plans out there for your student loans, right? So it's going to generally boil down to, does the standard plan work for me? Am I eligible for pay-as-you-earn? Do I use pay-as-you-earn or revised pay-as-you-earn? Right? So you can boil that down out of all this confusing table here into those three options that you're going to have available, right? I'm going to recommend that you get started in one of these income-driven plans, right? But this does require you to know which one you should choose, right? And you'll see here, I see this all the time, right? Everybody associates the income plans under the income-based umbrella, right? But their income-based is a specific type of plan, right? And as I just kind of covered with you, it's probably not the best plan for you, right? You're going to want to lean towards the standard, pay-as-you-earn, or revised pay-as-you-earn. In rare cases, we may see the older version of IBR as kind of a fourth option, depending on the specifics of the circumstance, right? But most of the time, people are like, oh, income-based, that's the one I want, because I never heard of any of these other ones, right? But in most cases, pay-as-you-earn or revised pay-as-you-earn is going to be your most beneficial repayment plan. So choose the right one, right? Because there's consequences to switching, right? So you want to keep the switching to an absolute minimum, right? Ideally, you wouldn't have to switch at all, right? But if you do, you want to switch maybe once, right? Because either you chose the wrong one, or maybe the one you chose at that specific time, your circumstances have changed sufficiently enough where it makes sense for you to switch. Or maybe there'll be a new income-driven plan that comes online in the future, like it did for us, and you'll have to think about whether or not it makes sense to switch in the future, right? But generally, you want to know which repayment plan that you are eligible for so you can select it, right? If you do work for a nonprofit or will, select that particular button. Your family size, right? What's your family size in here? If it's just you, oh, I don't want to, that's dependents. I'm going to take that off, right? Marital status, what is your marital status? If you filed a tax return, right, you can pull it directly from the IRS, right? So if you have a tax return on file from when you graduated vet school, so from your fourth year or your final year of vet school, right? I mean, if you heard something similar to this discussion while you were a student, you know that we always encourage graduating veterinary students to file a tax return before they graduate and leave their vet school, so you can have that tax return on file that you can use as income documentation to get started in your income-driven plan, right? If you didn't do that, that's okay, right? You've got a really beneficial option temporarily here to report your own income information, right? So if you don't have a tax return on file, you can report your own income. Right now, if you're in between jobs, right, you haven't started your job yet, right? What's your current income? Right? Think about that, right? What is your current income, right? If you don't have any income yet, say you don't have any income, right? Because that will also help you to achieve a very low payment for the first 12 months of repayment. Still wants to know, did you file a federal income tax return in either of the last 2 years? Yes or no, right? Maybe you didn't, right? Do you currently have taxable income, right? Do you currently have taxable income? Have you started your job? Have you received any income from that job, right? If the answer is yes, then you're going to have to provide some documentation of that income, right? Or you can use the verbal method this time around. If you don't yet have, or yet not yet received any taxable income, then you can say no, right? And they will set your payment to zero for the first 12 months, right? So here's this verbal declaration of your income, right? Because I checked that box earlier. What is my yearly gross income? Put the whole dollar amount in there, right? So this is how you can document your income if you don't have a tax return on file. And that's as far as I can take it there, right? If you do have a tax return on file, then they will ask you to put the address, your social security number, where you live when you file that tax return, and it'll go pull the most recently filed adjusted gross income from that tax return, right? And it'll use that number as documentation for your income. It'll ask you, has your income decreased since you filed this tax return, right? For most of you, it's very hard to have an income that's less than what it was during fourth year, right? So the answer to that question is always no, which means they will use that taxable income documentation for that payment calculation for the first 12 months.
And Tony, we actually have a question in the Q&A right now about those tax returns. Is the tax return on file our 2021 taxes, or are we supposed to do a 2022 return before graduation for this?
So nobody's had to file a 2022 tax return yet, right? Because that tax year is not closed, right? So it would have been a 2021 tax return that you would have ideally filed before April 15th of 2022, right? So the most recent tax return that you can have on file is from the 2021 tax year. Right now, maybe you filed one from 2020 and didn't file one for 2021. That would work too, right? They will go back for the most two recent tax years, right? So right now that's 2021 and 2020, right? So if you didn't file a 2021 tax return and you did file a 2020, then you can use that one as well. The earlier you start this consolidation process, the better it is, right? And this is why we have to do this specific to this audience, right? Because if you're a year in repayment or 2 years in repayment and you're like, oh, I remember this guy was telling me about consolidation, maybe I should do that now, that would be a really, really bad idea, right? This consolidation window is very unique to this specific period that you're in right now, right? If you don't take advantage of it and your grace period expires, then it probably is not going to make sense for you to consolidate later. Right now, that can change depending on the complexity of your loan portfolio, but you really want to take advantage of this specific time frame now to get all of the benefits that we talked about here, right? Because after that window closes, it probably isn't going to make sense for you to consolidate. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about the repayment options themselves. Right, so we've kind of talked about the time.
Before you dive into that, Tony, we've got a couple of questions here about the current pandemic forbearance and things like that relate to, will that change your repayment strategy at all? Especially with the talk of student loan forgiveness in politics right now?
Absolutely not. If anything, it bolsters it, right? Because what we've seen is that there has been nothing but measures taken to improve the benefits of your federal student loans for the duration of this income-driven repayment experiment. So the trick is to make sure that you're maximizing those benefits and making sure that you're in a position to receive the maximum benefits. Again, you're not getting any benefit other than the interest being shut off right now towards forgiveness by leaving your loans in the grace period. Right? So taking advantage of that ability to consolidate to end that grace period will make sure that once your consolidation is complete, you get the clock ticking towards forgiveness, right? They're going to be doing a huge accounting exercise over the next 6 months where they're going to go back and look at any historical repayment time you've had on your loans and give them some eligible forgiveness credit. Right. So for those of you, particularly some of the examples I've shown that may have been in repayment on their loans before they went into vet school, may even have some forgiveness qualifying time on those before vet school loans, which would make you eligible for forgiveness sooner. Right. And again, the sooner you hit forgiveness, the more beneficial it is. Right. So I would definitely take advantage of what we're recommending in terms of the consolidation to prepare yourself to get the maximum forgiveness qualifying credit that you can get in case you need it, right? And if you don't, because you've earned way more money than you ever thought you were going to earn, then congratulations, right? But you generally shouldn't be worrying about paying the valuable cash flow you have right now towards your student loans if you can take advantage of a very low payment, the pandemic forbearance benefits, and the forgiveness time until you see what your normal or new consistent income is going to be as a veterinary practitioner, right? So I would definitely again, take advantage of the consolidation window that you have so you can get that forgiveness clock ticking, because it's really hard to go back in time to get qualifying forgiveness time, right? But we are seeing some of that being made available for older borrowers, right? People who have loans for a really long time that have been in repayment on them for a really long time receive some of those benefits, right? But you want to set yourself up for receiving that forgiveness credit regardless of that type of opportunity or not, right? So I mean, does that, I mean, you know, to me, the pandemic forbearance benefits are an opportunity for you to have a longer period of time to kind of work through repayment. Even if you've made a few mistakes along the way, they kind of get ironed out, right? But I don't know how much longer that time is going to last. And because this pandemic forbearance period overlaps with your grace period time, right? I don't want to wait and see what happens there. And even if they do extend the pandemic forbearance benefits beyond the end of August, you still want to have that grace period ended and start accumulating forgiveness time, because your forgiveness clock won't start ticking until November or December once that grace period officially ends, right? So that wouldn't change that part of the strategy at all. Right now, whether or not it makes sense for you to potentially pay more towards your student loans while the interest rates are off, that's really going to be dependent upon your debt to income ratio and whether or not you're likely to hit forgiveness, which gets into the next part that we're going to talk about, right? Is projecting your student loan repayment costs using your taxable income to see if it's likely, more than likely or less than likely, that you're going to reach forgiveness. And if it's more than likely, then you don't want to pay a dime more than your income requires you to pay towards your student loans. Focus on the forgiveness and all of your other financial wellness. If it does appear that you're going to pay your loans to zero before you hit forgiveness, right, and you're fairly confident that that's going to play out, right, then there can be a case to be made to make some additional payments towards your student loans before the pandemic forbearance period ends, as long as you're not pulling that money away from those other critical financial wellness items, right? And that's, you know, for the 2022 graduating class, it's hard for me to imagine a scenario where those of you that are reporting the student debt that you guys told me that you have, which is on average more than $225,000, right, that you're going to have your financial wellness items checked off by the end of the summer here, where it would make sense for you to make a sizable payment towards your student loans before the pandemic forbearance period ends, right? So again, it doesn't seem like there's a lot of room there for you to benefit from that aspect of the pandemic forbearance period, just based on where you are in your career time frame here. Right now, if you're at the very low end of the borrowing spectrum, your debt to income ratio is less than 1, maybe, right? But I still think you can probably do a better job with that money in the long run by focusing on more beneficial financial wellness items than over focusing on your student debt right out of the gate here.
Before we move on to the next section, we've got some great questions here about the stuff we've just talked about. So I'd like to take a second to ask some of those. If you don't consolidate your HPSL, LDS loans with your unsubsidized federal loans, you're required to pay them off entirely?
Yes. Yep. And only under a standard 10-year plan payment, right? That's the only repayment option you have available for those health profession student loans, loans for disadvantaged students, is a standard 10-year plan, right? So if you leave them outside of your consolidation, you will have 2 separate payments that you have to make. You're going to have to make one towards your federal direct loans, and you're going to have another one that you're making towards your health profession student loans, right? So your overall total monthly student payment will be higher if you don't consolidate them than if you do, right? Because if you consolidate them all under a direct loan, consolidation loan, and then use an income-driven repayment plan, your income will cover the monthly payment for that entire balance, right? Rather than having multiple payments across multiple different loan types, right? So essentially, if you leave your health profession student loan outside of the consolidation, it's essentially the same as like a private loan, right? So the same is true for those of you that have federal loans and private loans, right? You're going to have a monthly payment that's due on your federal student loan. You're also going to have a monthly payment or payments that are due on your private loans, right? So we want to do our best to keep the overall monthly student loan payment that we have to pay to the lowest level possible, and a payment that covers the most amount of loans possible, right? The easiest way to do that is to consolidate all of your eligible federal loans into a direct consolidation loan. Ideally, that will be the only loan payment you have to make. But if you do also have private loans or other loans that you can't consolidate, right, then you'll have the federal student loan payment that is based on your income, and then you'll have those other loan payments that are, based on the terms of that particular loan. It's a good question.
Another one here. I have all federal loans, 8 in total. When looking at the details of each loan, they all have different payment dates. Is consolidation the only way to make where there's only one due date?
Yeah, I mean, that you could think of that as another benefit, right? I mean, if you apply for an income-driven plan, again, there's no reason based on that description for you to not consolidate, right? So I highly encourage you to consolidate, right? But if you were to apply for an income-driven plan, because first of all, you can't apply for an income-driven plan during your grace period, right? They're going to ignore it because your loans aren't eligible yet to be in repayment until the grace period is ending, right? So you can't apply for an income-driven plan until about 30 days before that grace period ends, right? So again, the grace period time won't count. If the interest rates get turned back on, then the interest is going to accrue. It'll get added to your principal, right? If I have those 8 loans, put them all in the consolidation loan, and they'll all be covered under the same repayment plan, and they'll all have that same repayment due date going forward. But even if you didn't consolidate them and you applied for an income-driven plan after the grace period ended, they would still end up all in the same payment due date, right? So that is not necessarily going to be an issue once you reach repayment, right? But there's still a lot of value there to you consolidating those 8 loans to get them all covered under the same payment and get the grace period ended early.
Any thoughts on Ed Financial as a servicer?
None, other than they're not Mohila. So yeah, again, I always, for whatever reason, I think everybody really wants to not have to consolidate. And I don't understand that entirely, right? I mean, there are so many more benefits to consolidating than not consolidating, right? And if you read any of the emails that I was sending you about this session here today, I have never, ever once that I can remember, sat and looked at somebody's loan portfolio and said, wow, it would have been a lot better if this person did not consolidate. That has never crossed my mind. But I can't tell you how many times I've looked at somebody's student loans that are 2, 5, 10, 15 years out of school and been like, damn, this would have been a lot easier to manage if they would have consolidated their loans, right? So take advantage of that benefit that you have at your fingertips to simplify all of this, right? Don't try to negotiate your way out of it, right? Yes, it's going to require you to sit down and look at your student loans and go through the consolidation process and maybe manually add those health profession student loans, but your future self is going to be much more thankful that you did that later.
So interest during school and grace period are added to the principal, but interest after school is not added to the principal?
It depends, right? So interest accrued during school, during the grace period, will get added to your principal no matter what. It's part of the starting repayment mechanism. Consolidation will also add any unpaid interest that you have currently to your principal, right? So again, another reason why you want that to happen sooner rather than later, right? Because if I wait until November to consolidate or just for my grace period to expire, you have the potential to have more interest accrue if that pandemic forbearance benefit ends, which will increase the amount that gets added when your grace period ends, right? The interest that accrued during school, during your grace period, when you enter repayment is going to get added to your principal no matter what you do or don't do, right? Now, that's the only time that the unpaid interest should get added to your principal. After that, it's up to you to navigate the repayment specifics appropriately to prevent any additional unpaid interest from getting added to your principal. Right? So it depends on the time frame that you have, that you're considering when it talks about unpaid interest being added, and you want to force that unpaid interest to happen sooner rather than later in the position that you guys are in, but then prevent it from getting added to your principal by getting your annual renewal documentation in on time, not switching repayment plans, not using deferment and forbearance, right? That's what will prevent that unpaid interest from getting capitalized during repayment, right? But you guys aren't in repayment yet, right? I'm trying to get you into repayment so you can get to that point where you won't experience any unpaid interest capitalization going forward. Does that make sense?
I'm sure they'll let us know in the
Yeah,
comments if it didn't.
hopefully.
One more here. What if you have submitted the direct loan consolidation application and A, didn't indicate that you wanted to be considered for PSLF, and B, selected a plan under which the payments don't count towards PSLF, such as extended? Can you correct this application?
That's a good question. I don't know. So I think that I'm guessing, or I'm imagining that as part of that submission, you probably received some kind of confirmation email or notification, and hopefully that has some information you can use to reach out to either the Federal Student Loan Ombudsman, so they're kind of the official referee of the federal student loans, that you can see if you can correct or stop that consolidation, or there is an opportunity for you to add different loans to a consolidation during the 180-day period from an existing consolidation. So I wonder if there's also kind of an opportunity to change that consolidation before it processes. They do have to check in with you to confirm that you've got all of the loans added that you want added, and that everything looks kind of a-okay. So you may have an opportunity there too to say, oh, and second thought, I want to choose a different repayment plan or a different loan servicer or whatever the case is. But I would call, right? I would call the Federal Student Loan Ombudsman. I would look for any kind of number there on the Department of Education website, the studentaid.gov, and say, hey, I submitted my consolidation, but I think I want to change a couple of these entries. How do I do that? And see what they say.
Yeah, absolutely. I know we've got a bunch of questions coming up about forgiveness, so I'll let us kind of keep moving forward here.
Okay, great. So this is what you guys told me you want to do in terms of picking a repayment plan, right? So this is kind of encouraging, right? So a third of you hadn't decided, so keep an open mind, which is great. This is the one that worries me, right? 18% choosing IBR, right? Unless you're not eligible for pay-as-you-earn, right? And maybe you're married and it makes sense for you to file separately from your spouse to keep your monthly payment low, right? IBR is probably not going to be the plan that you want to choose, right? Pay-as-you-earn is going to be one of again, that first one I'm looking for. If I'm not eligible for pay-as-you-earn, I'm going to look at revised pay-as-you-earn, except in the rare cases where I'm not eligible for pay-as-you-earn, I'm married, and my specifics might indicate that I should use IBR, the old version of IBR, right? So this one, great, probably should be more, right? Probably should be less. Right, so those are the things that hopefully while we're working through this and you're putting your information into the My Student Loans tool, adding your loans, and then sending it over to the loan repayment simulator, right? Those are the things that you want to be analyzing, right? And asking questions about while we're kind of going through this material. Right, so this is how they calculate your monthly payment using an income-driven repayment plan. Right, they're going to take your taxable income, 150% minus 150% of the federal poverty guidelines, right? And they're going to take the corresponding percentage based on the repayment plan that you're eligible for and the one that you choose to use, right? So this is one of the reasons why pay-as-you-earn and revised pay-as-you-earn is so beneficial, right? Because it requires the lowest percentage of your income, right? 10% of your discretionary income. Right now, you all told me on average you are earning about $96,000 if I back out all of the people doing internships and residencies. Right, so $95,000 minus 1.5 times the federal poverty guidelines, which are $13,590 for a family size of one. My discretionary income is about $75,000. 10% of that is $622 per month. Right, so How much should I pay towards my student loans each month? Right? First step, calculate what your income would require you to pay. Now, you guys are telling me that you're anticipating paying $1,200 a month towards your student loans, right? Your income, on average, is going to require you to pay half of that, right? Don't pay more than your income requires, particularly as you're just getting started, right? You've got $600 a month here of wiggle room that you can use to help with your other financial wellness items, right? As your income increases and hits your tax return, right, that's when your payment will go up, right? So you don't have to stress out over how much do I need to pay on my student loans. You let your income decide for you, right? And $1,200 a month, just using this table, is somewhere between 150 and 200,000, right? So when you're earning $175,000 of taxable income, that's when you should be paying $1,200 a month towards your student loans, right? But don't pay your student loans like you're earning 175 grand a year until you're earning 175 grand a year, right? So there's really interesting discussion on the student debt message boards going on right now. It's like, well, what if what if my income hits $200,000? Well, congratulations, right? That's when you'll pay maybe $1,500 a month towards your student loans, right? That doesn't mean that you should pay $1,500 a month before you're earning the 200,000. Wait until you reach that level, and ideally you're maintaining that level. So that's your monthly payment towards your student loans, right? Before you get there, you'll have better things that you can do with the extra money that you have in your budget that you can take advantage of, right? That will likely reduce your taxes, increase your long-term wealth, and maybe even help to keep your loan payment lower for longer, right? So that's the strategy around using all of these things to your advantage and letting your income determine your monthly payment versus paying more than you have to just to accelerate your student loan payment, maybe, right? Because just because you pay more towards your student loans doesn't necessarily mean you're going to avoid forgiveness or even reduce the total amount that you pay, right? That's what the simulator shows us, right? That just because you pay a little bit extra. So, I mean, I think, and this is to be expected, right? So, every other debt that you're going to have for the remainder of your life, the more you pay towards it, the sooner you're going to rid yourself of that debt and the lower amount the total cost will be. Unfortunately, that's not necessarily the case with your federal student loans, right? Particularly under these income-driven plans, because your income percentage that you have to pay towards the student loan payment is so low, right? It does some really strange things over time, right? So like in a classic scenario, I only have to pay $700 a month towards my student loans. I'm going to pay $150 a month more. Well, that may not actually accelerate my payment, right? So I pay $150 a month more. I still end up hitting forgiveness. Sure, I reduced the potential tax on forgiveness, but I voluntarily paid more towards my student loans than I had to, right? In that case, it would have been better for me to just pay what my income required, plan for the tax, and use the extra cash flow for other things, right? So you have to kind of find out what that number is for you, for what actually accelerates payment and ends up hitting the balance to zero versus what just ends up being wasted extra payments towards your student loans. And that generally tracks the standard 10-year plan payment, right? Usually when I'm using the simulator, I'm comparing, well, what does pay as you earn require me to pay versus what does a standard 10-year plan payment require me to pay? And the closer those two numbers are to each other, the more in line it is with an aggressive repayment strategy, right? But I don't see that being the case very often for new graduate veterinarians, right? I mean, we tend to graduate with a good chunk of change in student debt, and our starting incomes, while they've been increasing, are still relatively low compared to the amount that we graduated with student debt, right? So it generally doesn't make sense for us to pay something like a standard 10-year plan amount until our income appreciably increases, right? And that's the value of using the simulator. So when we get down to deciding between the various repayment plans that are out there, here's a table that helps to break down the various differences. And I often get questions about what's the difference between pay and repay, right? So one of the major differences between pay and repay is the maximum repayment period, right? So pay-as-you-earn has a 20-year maximum repayment period. Revised pay-as-you-earn has a 25-year maximum repayment period. Generally speaking, the shorter amount of time you spend in repayment, the less you're going to pay, right? So check one for pay-as-you-earn, right? But if I'm not eligible for pay-as-you-earn, then I might want to use revised pay-as-you-earn. It has a 25-year repayment period or maximum repayment period for those with graduate school loans, which is every veterinarian. The next really important difference between pay and repay is how your income is treated for repayment purposes when you're married. Pay-as-you-earn allows you the option to exclude your spouse's income from the student monthly payment calculation, the student loan monthly payment calculation, if you file your taxes separately from your spouse. Revised pay-as-you-earn, even if I do file my taxes separately and I'm married, it doesn't care, right? It still requires me to provide my spouse's income documentation to calculate that monthly payment. There are some certain exceptions there if you're going through a divorce or you're separated from your spouse, right? But otherwise, you do have to provide your spouse's income to be considered for revised pay-as-you-earn, right? So that can be a detrimental side effect of revised pay-as-you-earn. Now, IBR will allow you to separate your income from your spouse as well, but IBR, the old version, has a higher monthly payment percentage, right? So then we have to look at the simulator to see if the repay filing jointly accounting for my wife's or spouse's student loan balance and income will be less than if I file separately and pay a higher share of my income towards a monthly student loan payment. Right, so this is what the simulator does for you, right? It helps you work through all of these differences and compare these plans as you start filling in your income, your tax filing status, your spouse's income, your spouse's student debt if they have it, right? That's what the simulator is going to crank through so you can work through those cost benefit analysis to see which one's going to help you keep the most money in your pocket. Now, revised pay-as-you-earn has an interesting benefit that the other plans do not have, right? So if your payments do not cover the monthly interest that accrues, the government will cover half of that difference. So for example, if I have $1,000 a month of interest that's accruing and I'm making a $500 payment towards my student loans, I'm falling short by $500 on the interest that accrues each month, right? The Department of Education will kick in $250 each month to lessen the impact of that unpaid interest. Right now, what this means is that revised pay-as-you-earn helps prevent the accelerated growth of your unpaid interest balance during those periods when your income is very low. Right. So how this translates to repayment strategies, right? This is one of the reasons why revised pay-as-you-earn can be an extremely good strategic choice for people that have a debt to income ratio less than 1 when they're starting after veterinary school, or those of you that are going to pursue internships and residencies where you expect your income to exceed your debt after that advanced training. Right now, some of that requires a bit of a crystal ball, right? Because if your income doesn't surpass your debt relatively quickly, right, then there's a good chance that you would hit forgiveness under pay-as-you-earn, which is likely then going to be the more beneficial pick. Right? So I don't generally recommend that people use revised pay-as-you-earn unless they're really confident that their debt to income ratio is less than 1 is going to remain there for the duration of repayment and happens relatively quickly after graduation or after your advanced training. Right? Otherwise, stick with pay-as-you-earn, right? Because that benefit will be better in the long run. But you will see this play out in the simulator, right? I'm just kind of putting to words what the thousands and thousands of simulations that we've run for our colleagues have shown us over the years, right? So you will see this in the simulator as you start to plug your numbers in there. All right, so I know, Becca, you said there was some questions about forgiveness. So before we actually run a couple of simulations, I'm just going to outline kind of what forgiveness means, right? So if you make payments for the maximum repayment period and you still have a balance remaining, it will be forgiven. Right now, forgiven debt is treated as taxable income in almost all circumstances. Right, so the IRS treats anything forgiven, any debt forgiven, not just student debt, any kind of debt forgiven as if you earned it as income. Right, so you have to report that on your tax return, which is what triggers the tax. Right, but right now, we are actually in a special exempt period where anyone who receives student loan forgiveness between now and 2025 does not have to pay a tax on it, regardless of whether or not that forgiveness is under public service loan forgiveness or under an income-driven repayment plan. Now, we haven't seen very many people receive student loan forgiveness yet because these plans haven't really been around long enough for people to hit the maximum repayment period. But that's where some of these recent announcements come in for people who have been in repayment for 20 plus years. They're going to go back in time and say anything that you've done that looks like repayment is now going to be eligible for consideration under a forgiveness plan. And if you've made payments on your loans for 20 or 25 years, we're going to forgive it. Right? So we're going to see thousands and thousands of people receive student loan forgiveness in the next few years here as they're processing through that announcement that they just made a few weeks ago. Right, and those people are not going to have to pay a tax under student loan forgiveness because of this special exemption that's in place between 2021 and 2025. That does open the door for Congress to then extend that forgiveness tax exemption beyond 2025. So I'm projected, my wife and I are projected to hit student loan forgiveness in 2037, right? And the reason why we continue to plan as if we have to pay a tax is because our forgiveness is outside of that current tax exempt window, right? But if that changes, right, then we're going to have a fund that we can use for other things and not have to pay that tax. But right now, because I'm outside of that forgiveness tax window, exempt window, I'm going to plan as if I have to pay that tax. And I recommend that you do too, right? Until you get some kind of confirmation that you may be experiencing forgiveness that's tax exempt as well. But this is what triggers the tax, right? So let's say that I did have to pay the tax, right? 2037 rolls around. I have some amount of my student debt balance remaining. I get a 1099-C in the mail indicating that I had some amount of debt canceled on my behalf. I have to report that as other income on my tax return, right? That's going to put me into some tax bracket, depending on what the tax brackets are and the tax rates are at that time, right? Which is then going to determine how much I have to pay the IRS when I file my taxes by April 15th of that tax filing year, right? So that's what triggers the tax. And that's how it would work if I have to pay a tax on it. Now, most people look at the tax as like this thing to avoid, right? And I can get that, right? Nobody wants to have to think about paying a massive tax in a given year. But the way this works out, right, is it can end up being a pretty significant discount, right? Because if you think about how tax rates work, right, we don't pay 100% income tax on our income, and we haven't in decades and decades, right? So no matter what, tax bracket this puts me into, the top marginal federal income tax bracket right now is 30, I think it's 35%, right? So or maybe 37, but regardless, right, that means I'm getting a 63% discount on the remainder of my student loan balance if I hit forgiveness, provided the tax rates don't appreciably change between now and when I hit forgiveness, right? And there's a lot of history to suggest that they probably won't, right? I mean, we argue about taxes a lot in this country, but they don't change all that much, right? I mean, they go up 2% here, 3% there, go down 2% there, 3% there. Right? So we would have to have a pretty radical departure from how we currently tax income in this country to experience some punitive amount of income tax on some forgiven student loans. And that could very well happen. I really have no idea. But just looking at history as a gauge and projecting that into the future, it's probably unlikely, right? Which is why when I said I want to leave myself some room to adjust my forgiveness plan if I have to, that's why, right? There's just as good, if not better chance that I won't have to pay a tax or pay what the current federal tax rates are on my forgiven amount than, having to pay 100% on it, right? So, just take, again, these are things that you're going to have a better sense for and a better feel for once you start earning income, filing your tax returns, seeing how much you pay in federal and state income taxes, right? And what your average tax rate is, what your effective tax rate is, what your marginal income tax rate will be, which will give you an idea of what you can expect to pay on any forgiveness if you think you're going to hit student loan forgiveness. All right, before we hit public service loan forgiveness, let me just run a simulation to kind of show you how this can play out. Right, so let's say that this person is going to go on and practice mixed animal practice, right, and earn $80,000 a year is what they told me, right? So graduation year income or the student debt information gets pulled over. Weighted average interest rate, let's just assume 6% for now. And maybe that'll incorporate the 0.25% interest rate discount, right? I am going to fill in, right, the $80,000 here. Now we're going to have to assume some kind of growth rate on that income, right? So it's going to grow over time, particularly if you're paid on some kind of pro sal. It'll most definitely grow over time as you're getting better at practicing and they're increasing prices at your practice, right? But as we talked about, if you file the tax return before you graduated, or you use that verbal income confirmation where you say, I don't have any income yet because I haven't started my job, right? I can secure a $0 payment for the first 12 months. If I start my job next month, earning the equivalent of 80 grand a year, right? I'm going to have $40,000 maybe to report on my taxes at the end of this tax year when I file my taxes in early 2023. Right? So your income-driven monthly payment plan is almost kind of on a lag every year, right? What did you earn last year, right? What does your tax return show last year? That's what we're going to base the next 12 months of payments on, right? Provided your income isn't any lower than what that past tax return showed, right? So, I mean, the whole spirit of these programs are not to make student loan payment be a punitive amount of your income. Right? That's why they're not terribly concerned if they have the exact amount that you're earning now, right? Because as your income increases over time, they'll catch you in the future on those increased monthly payments, right? But as you're getting started, you can take advantage of that, right? You can keep your monthly payment low. You can start building an emergency fund, saving for retirement, working on the down payment for a home or a practice if that's on the list of financial goals you have. Work to pay down other less flexible debt like private loans, credit card debt. About 20% of you told me you were carrying credit card debt, right? So that might be from moving expenses, your fourth year or whatever the case is, but that's the stuff you want to eliminate before you worry about your federal student loans, right? And you can use the flexibility you have here in those first couple of years to do that. If you're married or will be in the future, you can add that, right? If you have some children now or will in the future, you can add that as well. Right, that will all play into that discretionary income calculation. Right, so when we start to work our way through this simulation, now this is a pretty dramatic example, right? This is where the debt to income ratio stuff comes into play, right? So I've got an $80,000 starting salary and $350,000 of student debt. That's a pretty high debt to income ratio, right? The income driven repayment plans really are dramatically favorable in high debt to income ratio scenarios. Right now, veterinarians typically graduate with debt to income ratios of 2, right, or even higher, right? Those are the types of debt to income ratios that really favor income-driven repayment plans. Right now, when we go down the list here and we start looking at, the monthly payments, and I'm comparing it to a standard 10-year plan, there's probably no chance that I'm going to be able to make that payment, right? I don't have to make a payment based on my income in the first 12 months. If I have that tax return on file or I haven't started my job yet, the second 12 months are about $2,000, right? Versus 92 if I'm trying to pay the standard 10-year. And I keep sliding my way down. Now this person in reality isn't eligible to use pay as you earn, right? So I'm probably looking at revised pay as you earn next, right? We can see here that revised pay as you earn is higher than pay as you earn, which is generally going to be the case when your debt to income ratio is greater than 1, right? But revised pay as you earn is going to give this person a little bit longer time to plan for the forgiveness and make it a little bit easier to start a forgiveness savings plan to navigate that potential tax if they have to pay it. Right. So, and yep, go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say, you had mentioned our married borrowers, and we have a couple of questions from them if you have a second there.
Sure.
If I got married 2 weeks before graduation, but my last tax return, 2021, was filed single, should I select my status as single for now?
Yeah, you're not going to be able to. That's a little bit of I guess unfortunate trap in the income-driven documentation time frame, because they ask you, are you married? Right? And the answer to that question for you right now is yes, but you haven't had the opportunity to yet file a tax return as married, either jointly or separately, right? So you're going to have to provide your spouse's income documentation for this first 12 months of monthly payments, right? Regardless, right? So there's no opportunity for you to do otherwise, right? Because technically, right, you would have to lie on the form, right? Because they're going to ask you the question, are you married? Right now, you weren't married when you filed that past tax return, but that's not the question. The question is, are you married? Are you married now? Right? And the answer to that is yes. And when they ask you, did you file a tax return in the recent 2 years? If you have, right, the answer to that question is yes, but your spouse's income isn't going to be included on there. So they might be able to use that tax return for your share of the income documentation, but they're still going to require you to provide your spouse's documentation if you're using any of the income-driven plans.
Sorry, go ahead.
Now, there still won't be a payment due until after the pandemic forbearance benefits end, right? So you may luck out by not having to make a payment until at least September, or if they extend it through the end of the year, you may even get to a point where you can file that tax return early next year, and you would only have a payment based on your combined incomes briefly, right? Because as soon as you get a chance to file a tax return for the 2022 year and get that on file, and if it makes sense for you to file separately, if that documentation is now less than what you used currently, then you can submit to have your payment recalculated under that new income situation.
We have another one here. I filed a 2021 tax return as a single fourth-year student, but recently got married and will file a joint return for 2022. Will that affect income-driven repayment plan application process?
Yeah, it will. Again, same scenario, right? Because the answer to the married question, yes, right? Which means now your spouse is going to have to co-sign that income documentation, or at least provide their income documentation to have your payment calculated under an income-driven plan. Right now, it may not make sense for you to file jointly in the future, right? So let's look at that with this simulation, right? So let's say that this person is married, right? And we can look at the difference actually between filing separately and jointly in the same simulation for pay and repay. Right now, if you live in a community property state, the game gets even more complicated, right? So community property states are these red ones, right? Louisiana, Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, Nevada, California, Washington, Idaho, Wisconsin. Wisconsin's kind of the oddball there, right? But in a community property state, when you file your taxes separately, they pool your income, you get half, your spouse gets half. Sometimes that can end up working in your favor, other times not, right? But it is something you should be aware of depending on where you're living and filing your taxes. So let's say that you're filing separately. Let's say your spouse is earning 60 grand a year, right? Whatever the appropriate income increase is for there. Let's assume for now that they don't have income, right? Or I mean, they don't have student debt. But if I run this simulation, you'll see something interesting. Now, when you're filing your taxes jointly, or you have to include your spouse's income, your monthly payment is going to go up. Right? So you're going to pay more towards your student loans. And as I illustrated before, revised pay as you earn, even if you file your taxes separately, you still have to provide your spouse's income. So we do that in the simulator, right? So we can see here that the monthly payment, or the total repayment costs, went up quite a bit. Before, revised pay as you earn and pay as you earn were similar, right? There was maybe about a $30,000 or $20,000 difference. but now it's close to $200,000 difference, right? So this is where filing your taxes separately from your spouse, particularly if you're eligible for pay-as-you-earn, can be hugely beneficial, like hundreds of thousands of dollars beneficial, right? Just by excluding this person's spouse's income from the calculation over 20 years of payment. Now, we also know that this particular person isn't eligible for pay-as-you-earn, right? But IBR does allow me to exclude my spouse's income. So in this particular case, I would choose IBR 2009 over revised pay-as-you-earn, file my taxes separately from my spouse to keep my payment lower than it would be under revised pay-as-you-earn, right? And ultimately pay less towards my student loans. Right now, this is going to require me also to do a cost benefit analysis each year that I file my taxes separately from my spouse to see what the tax penalty is for filing separately from my spouse, right? And I want to also compare the savings that I'm realizing from my monthly student loan payments versus what I'm giving up in the tax filing separately to see which one wins, right? Whichever one keeps the maximum amount of money in my pocket is going to be the one that I choose, right? Because I can do beneficial things with that extra cash flow to grow my overall wealth and improve my overall financial wellness, right? And you can change your tax filing status from year to year, right? So you know, it may make sense for you to file separately next year, but maybe not the following year. It really depends on how your circumstances are evolving over time, right? So you may want to, you're going to have to run that analysis every year. And it does, it gets complicated, but we're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars of difference here, right? So you want to know if that $100,000 is in your favor or not in your favor, right? Ideally, you want it in your favor. Public service loan forgiveness, right? So a little bit different, right? You don't have to worry about the tax on public service loan forgiveness, period, right? And the forgiveness happens at 10 years instead of 20 or 25 years, right? You're still doing the same thing. Direct loans only qualify. This is another reason why you want to get that consolidation started sooner rather than later, particularly if you have health profession student loans or loans for disadvantaged students, right? Because those loans by themselves are not going to be eligible for public service loan forgiveness. And if you don't consolidate them, they can't be considered for public service loan forgiveness, right? So if you do have those different loan types, you want to consolidate them into a direct loan so they can be considered for public service loan forgiveness if your career is taking you to an eligible employer. 501c3, state, federal, local, tribal organization, as long as you're working or considered to be working full-time under that employer, and that's at least 30 hours per week, you are making eligible public service loan forgiveness payments while using an income-driven plan on your direct loans. Right? And if you do that for a period of 10 years, doesn't have to be consecutive, then you can apply to have your loans forgiven, and that forgiveness is tax-free. Oh, sorry, I should have changed the color on those. But internship, if you're heading to an academic internship, that should be public service loan forgiveness qualifying. I believe all academic residencies should be, but you may find some people who disagree there, right? But your task is to find a residency coordinator there that will sign off on your public service loan forgiveness employment certification form. The trick there is, you know, because you live somewhere between a student and an employee and an indentured servant, right? Sometimes they're not willing to sign off on that employee section of the form, right? But the physicians really don't have a problem with this, but you know, we seem to have a problem with it. So, you know, it really is more about finding that right person there that's willing to sign off on your employee status as a resident at that institution. If you're heading into the military, academia, you know, working for a shelter, other nonprofit, as long as it's a 501c3, it's an eligible employer that could be considered for public service loan forgiveness. If your debt to income ratio is less than 1, you may not reach public service loan forgiveness, right? Because if your income exceeds your debt, your payment under an income-driven plan is going to be very similar to a standard 10-year plan payment, if not equal to a standard 10-year plan payment, which means you're going to pay the balance to zero in 10 years, right? And not have anything left to forgive. If you find yourself working towards public service loan forgiveness, right, pay as little as is required towards your student loans, right? Maximize the pre-tax employer benefits, right? So those would be 403Bs or any other kind of tax advantage retirement plan, right? So you can reduce your adjusted gross income, which will reduce the monthly payment on your student loans, and it'll maximize the amount forgiven. You want to lean towards pay as you earn if you're eligible. You do not want to defer your loans, and keep working and documenting your progress towards public service loan forgiveness, which involves the employment certification form that the Department of Education provides, right? And there was a link to that on these slides. This is somebody, a veterinarian, who recently received public service loan forgiveness, right? More than $430,000 wiped off of their balance sheet in December. And it was done under the temporary expanded public service loan forgiveness program, which just again illustrates that every move to change these plans has actually improved them rather than make them less beneficial, right? So there are tons of opportunities to have your loans forgiven, right? So don't be terribly quick to pay back more than your income requires towards your student loans when there are tons of opportunities to have them forgiven, which means you have more cash to use towards other areas of your financial wellness. All right, let me jump forward here a little bit. Any other questions on forgiveness?
Got a quick question on PSLF here.
Yep.
Do you have to be in a public service type job for all 10 years of payments? Not quite understanding how an internship can qualify.
Yeah, so an academic internship takes place most, at a 501c3 institution, right? So if you're doing an academic internship at a veterinary school, right, you as an intern, you're definitely working more than 30 hours per week, right? So bring the public service loan forgiveness employment certification form to your employer and have them sign off that you're meeting the employer requirements there. Now, the other part of that is going to require you to have your loans in an income-driven repayment plan, right? And maybe that's the hang up there, right? So you don't want to defer your loans during an internship or residency, right? You want your loans to be in a repayment plan, right? So take advantage of the time you have now to consolidate your loans, put them into an income-driven plan before you start your internship, right? You'll keep that payment extremely low, if not zero, if you have a tax return on file or you haven't started that internship yet, right? So you can secure a $0 payment, which is the same thing as deferment, except it qualifies towards forgiveness, right? So you want to keep your payment, your loans in a income-driven repayment plan during the internship. And once you get to that internship, find the equivalent of the coordinator or human resources person there, show them your public service loan forgiveness employment certification form. There'll be a part there that you fill out and there'll be a part that they fill out. And then they will document your progress towards public service loan forgiveness, right? So you'll get, if you get your loans consolidated now, you can probably get them into repayment by the time you're starting your internship, which means all 12 months of your internship would qualify towards public service loan forgiveness, right? And put you on that pathway to being eligible towards the 10 years or 120 monthly payments you need of eligible public service loan forgiveness time before you can apply to have your remaining balance forgiven tax-free.
Is there ever a time when forgiveness is not the goal? Example, I have $60,000 in loans and don't want to be paying on loans for 10 to 20 years. Is this when income-driven repayment isn't a good recommendation? Is a standard 10-year plan better?
Use the simulator, right? You can still use income-driven plans with low student debt totals, right? It's going to depend upon what your income is, right? So that the debt number alone is not sufficient to answer that question, right? I mean, there are plenty of people out there in veterinary medicine that are earning 60 grand a year, right? So your debt to income ratio could still be 1, right? But if you have $60,000 of student debt, right, and you're earning $100,000 a year, right? That's what I'm talking about in terms of using revised pay as you earn, right? That's where revised pay as you earn really shines, right? So let's take all of this stuff out, right? And we'll run this simulation, right? Because the problem becomes when I have a $60,000 balance and I'm earning $100,000 a year is how much should I pay towards my student loans, right? What is the number, right? And I think that, again, the way that the income-driven plans are set up, 10% of my discretionary income is a perfectly reasonable amount to pay towards my student loans, right? And if my debt to income ratio is very low, then more of my payment is going to cover the interest and the principal and pay the balance down sooner, right? In this case, I can see that revised pay as you earn will help me pay the balance to zero before a 10-year plan payment would, right? And that's if I just maintain a payment of 10% of my discretionary income, right? So I'd be looking at the revised pay as you earn repayment schedule to see how much I need to pay each month to reach that 8.5-year repayment time frame. Now, any dollar that I pay above that now will pay the balance to zero sooner, right? So this is where paying a little bit extra can make sense, right? Let's say I wanted to pay $150 extra towards my student loans with a debt to income ratio less than 1. Well, now I've reduced the amount of time I'm in repayment by 1.5 years, and I've knocked, $5,000 off the total repayment cost, right? But I still am only paying 10% of my discretionary income towards my student loans, right? Which gives me the other 90% to make sure that I'm shoring up all of my other financial wellness items. What happens here is that people tend to look at their budget and they're like, well, I've got $60,000 of student loans. I'm earning $100,000 a year. I'm just going to take whatever's left after I pay my bills and pay down my student loans. And that's fine, right? But it'd be better if you actually made sure you maximize your emergency fund, maxed out your retirement plan, saved for the down payment on a home, or bought a home simultaneously alongside doing that, right? So you're not like doing this station to station approach where, well, I'm not going to do anything else on my financial wellness front until I pay off my student loans. Don't wait 6 years to start your financial wellness plan. Do it all simultaneously. And if it's your student loans or not knowing how much I need to pay towards my student loans that's preventing me from doing so, then use a plan like revised pay as you earn that will set my payment to 10% of my discretionary income. And if I wanted to, I could still take advantage of that benefit of a $0 payment for the first 12 months and a very low payment for the second 12 months, right? It'll increase my total payment costs, right? Not by a ton, right? That's the benefit of having the lower balance, right? Is I have a lot more flexibility in terms of whether I take 5 years, 4 years, 3 years, 6 years. You're not going to change the amount you pay in total a whole heck of a lot, right? But you can really influence your financial wellness by taking a much more measured and balanced approach by making sure that you're doing all of those things as opposed to just racing to the end of student loan payment first before I do anything else. Right now, as long as you're doing all of those other things first and you're not sacrificing any of your other financial wellness goals and you still have some extra money to pay back your student loans under this particular scenario, then sure, pay a little bit extra towards your student loans and reduce this time and reduce this cost, right? But this isn't gonna, this is not the circumstance that I'm concerned with, right? You're going to pay your loan balance to zero relatively quickly using a reasonable percentage of your income, regardless of the path that you choose, right? It's the folks that are in the $150,000, $200,000, $300,000, $400,000 student loan balance that kind of try to take that same approach and end up bouncing around in repayment for a long time, getting extremely frustrating, and also sacrificing their financial wellness, right? So you can, and I do recommend that you look at the income-driven repayment plans, even with a relatively low amount of student debt, provided that your debt to income ratio is less than 1, right? You can still receive a lot of the same benefits, right? And prevent yourself from overpaying or paying more than your income requires you to pay towards your student loans, so you can start simultaneously building your financial wellness strategy as well, right? But if you were closer to this circumstance that I was running before, right? If you're closer to having this amount of student debt, right? Or the $300,000 of student debt, right? You can't afford to dabble in those sorts of things, right? Because the differences end up being in the hundreds of thousands of dollars versus the ones and tens of thousands of dollars. Right? So you have to just be really careful here. I don't want to make it sound like, you know, I don't care about the people that have a lower amount of student debt. It's just that the magnitude matters, right? The opportunity for mistakes and getting started on the right foot really matters more for those who have a higher starting balance or a higher debt to income ratio than those that have a lower debt to income ratio, right? But you still can, with the lower debt to income ratio scenarios, benefit from the income driven plans, particularly revised pay as you earn, if you want to. Right? And your financial wellness will probably be better for it. Right? And this is where this comes into play. Right? When I choose the best repayment plan, it's not the one that gives me the lowest total amount of paid. Right? That's a bonus. Right? The one that I'm focused on is the one that reduces the risk to myself and my family and maximizes my monthly cash flow. Right? Because I can do better things with that extra money than paying it towards my student loans more than my income requires. I also know that with my federal student loans, that if I walk out my front door and get hit by a bus, that my wife and my daughter do not have to pay my student loans. Right? So I'm not terribly worried about carrying my federal student loan balance longer because I have tons of protection against having somebody else having to pay it. Nobody else will ever have to pay my federal student loans. And I know that my federal student loan balance will disappear whether I pay it to zero or I hit forgiveness, right? So there's not a lot of incentive for me to race to the end of it, right? I want to make sure that I'm maximizing my cash flow in a more beneficial manner to not pay more taxes than I have to, not pay more towards my student loans than I have to, and make sure that I have long-term savings and reaching other financial goals that are overall going to improve my financial wealth and wealth and healthiness. So that's what I'm focused on. Now, for those of you that have a debt to income ratio greater than 2, that you're going to get this third bullet too, right? Just the way the income driven plans are structured.
You mentioned racing to the end there. I've got one of your favorite questions here. Can we not work the year before the tax bomb so it's taxed at the lowest bracket?
Yeah, I mean, you certainly can, right? I mean, that's a little bit too far off in the future for me to, take seriously right now, right? So, if you think that you're in a financial position where it makes sense for you to not work in that final year to save a little bit on a potential forgiveness tax, then go for it. Right. But you kind of have to think about that in another way. Right. I mean, if you have the opportunity to, let's say 20 years from now, earn $200,000 or $250,000 as a veterinarian, am I really going to pass that up so I can save, I don't know, $30,000 in taxes? Right. That doesn't seem like a very smart financial move. Right. But if you're in a financial position, you're otherwise, financially independent, right? Other than just covering the taxes on your student loans, and you can afford to take that year off and it's not going to penalize you all that much, right? And it does decrease your tax on forgiveness, then go for it, right? But we've got a lot of time between now and then to really, kind of think about taking that year off, right? But sure, I mean, it's certainly on the table, but when you get closer to that particular time frame, then you can crunch the numbers and see if that makes sense for you. This is generally what we're going to see, right? So if you run simulations, right, if you have a debt to income ratio, just like we showed with that less than 1 scenario, you're not going to hit forgiveness, right? So I think that maybe that's kind of the misunderstanding. Just because you use an income driven repayment plan doesn't mean you're going to be in repayment for 20 or 25 years. It just means your payment is a function of your income, right? But when your income is greater than your debt, the payment is going to pay down the debt. Right, as we illustrated in that last scenario, where you'll actually pay it to zero faster using revised pay as you earn than you will using a standard 10-year plan payment. Right, so just because you choose an income driven plan doesn't mean you're going to end up paying your loans for 20 or 25 years or hitting forgiveness. If your starting debt to income ratio is less than 1, then you're going to pay your balance to 0. If you're greater than 2, then it's quite likely that you're going to hit forgiveness, unless you experience a massive increase in your income somewhere along the way there, right? That maybe throws you into the less than 1 scenario, right? But, when that happens, congratulations, right? I'm probably, depending on when it happens, right? This is another reason to use the simulator. It depends on when that happens. If I've been making payments for 15 years, and then now all of a sudden I own a practice and my income is increased by a factor of 3, right? I'm probably still going to hit forgiveness, and it's going to make more sense for me to ride out those additional 5 years before I hit forgiveness and plan for the tax versus paying all those student loans off at that point, right? It's probably going to be cheaper to just plan for the forgiveness. Now, if something like that happens sooner, right, maybe 5 years into repayment, well, now we're talking a different story, right? Maybe then it's going to make more sense for me to pay more than what I was originally planning, or following something like a revised pay-as-you-earn scale if the numbers justify it, right? So you're going to want to play with the numbers when that happens for you, right? But there's nothing wrong with earning a ton of money and using an income-driven repayment plan, right? All the income-driven repayment plan does is prevent you from paying more than the discretionary income calculation requires you to pay, because there's always an opportunity for you to increase your long-term financial return by doing things other than just paying down your student loans. And that's because, again, your student loans don't compound, right? And those long-term investments can. And some of them can tax-free, right? Like your retirement savings, right? So I certainly don't want to think about paying more towards my student loans before I've already maxed out all of the access I have to tax-advantaged long-term savings accounts like Roth IRAs, traditional IRAs, 401ks, those sorts of things. HSAs, health savings accounts. Based on the information that you guys provided in the student debt and income signalment forms, most of you are going to enjoy an income-driven repayment plan, right? The less than 1 scenarios are kind of the outliers, right? And that's great if you're in that circumstance. You can still use an income-driven strategy to benefit from that, particularly in the short term, and to give you a reasonable amount to pay towards your student loans. The higher your debt to income ratio, the more beneficial income-driven repayment is going to be. The lower your debt to income ratio, the more closely an income-driven plan payment is going to parallel a standard 10-year plan amount. So think about what your taxable income needs to be in order for a pay-as-you-earn or revised pay-as-you-earn payment to equal a 10-year monthly payment, right? That to me is usually what turns the light bulbs on for most people, right? Because that's usually, you know, once you start digging into this a little deeper, somebody always asks, well, what's the break even? What's the break even, right? The break even generally happens when your debt to income ratio is 1, right? Because that's when pay-as-you-earn, revised pay-as-you-earn payments tend to look exactly like a standard 10-year plan payment, right? But if we're comparing it against a standard 10-year plan pay scale, right, then that has to happen really quickly for a standard 10-year plan payment to make sense compared to an income-driven plan payment. And that generally doesn't happen for most veterinarians, right? Except for those of you that are graduating and starting with a debt to income ratio less than 1 already, right? The scenarios where it does happen in veterinary medicine are with residencies, right? If I successfully navigate a surgical pathway and become a boarded surgeon, and I've got $250,000 of student debt, and I finish my surgical residency and I'm earning $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 a year, well, now I'm in a repay scenario, right? But the crystal ball comes into play. Surgical residencies are extremely competitive. It's not automatic that I'm going to get one, right? So I might consider using a repay strategy in anticipation of getting my surgical residency and completing that. But if it doesn't pan out, then I can revert to something like pay-as-you-earn, right? So that's, that I'm always looking for a way to use these things strategically just to prevent me from paying more than the discretionary income plan requires me to pay, but also leaning on the insurance. All this is really is insurance against things that you don't expect, right? Maybe your income is going to be a little bit lower than you expected, right? Maybe you're going to have to take some time off work. Maybe you're going to go out on family leave for a little bit longer to have a family and have some kids, right? I don't want to have to be paying a whole bunch of money towards my student loans just to stop payment for a period of times, put them in deferment, watch the interest capitalize, and then I'm right back where I started, right? I want to use the benefits that the income-driven plans provide to make sure that I'm keeping the clock ticking towards forgiveness in case I need it, not paying more than I have to towards my student loans, regardless of where my career takes me. And if I end up making more money than I ever thought possible, then I'll pay my loans to zero faster, right? But I want to leave myself in the most beneficial, risk-free position as possible, carrying something like a student loan balance that is pretty significant. Here were some other questions that I thought were really interesting, right? Can I change my repayment strategy as my income changes? You don't have to change your repayment strategy. Pick the plan that changes with you, right? The income-driven plans change with you. If your income goes up, the payment goes up. If the income goes down, the payment goes down, right? If I hit forgiveness, so what? As long as I'm prepared for it, I don't care, right? If I pay the balance to zero before I hit forgiveness, that just means I earned more than I expected. Congratulations. I don't have to worry about the forgiveness, right? I'm not, that way I just make sure that I keep more of my money available to work on other areas of that financial wellness. We kind of covered the how to determine how to file my taxes. I'm going to run the simulations. I'm going to run one filing jointly. I'm going to run one filing separately. I'm going to look to see what those major differences are, right? Then I'm going to probably have to visit with an accountant to see what the tax implications are filing jointly and separately and see which one wins, right? I just had Monday, I met with a veterinarian who's married to a physician who finished their medical residency, and she was able to successfully get myself, her accountant, and her financial planner on the phone all at once, right? And that's really what this is. That's the best case scenario, right? Is that I have all of the people in the room that can help me make the decisions I need to make to keep the maximum amount of money that I'm earning as a household in our control, minimize our taxes, maximize our long-term savings, and minimize the impact to our student loans, right? There's not one person that's going to be able to help you with all of this. It's going to take a team. And as you learn more about personal finance, taxes, where your career is taking you, what your income looks like, that is going to evolve with you. Any other questions on some of these things that are kind of popping up here?
Yeah, let's take a look here. Is there a difference between being claimed as a dependent versus being independent for declaring your income for the first year of payments post-grad?
No, it doesn't matter. So if your parents still claim you as a dependent on their tax returns, that will have no bearing on your monthly payment for your income-driven repayment plan.
Okay. And is it recommended for a two-vet household to consolidate federal unsubsidized loans taken out as individuals prior to marriage? If so, how can we go about this?
God, no. Do not do that. And thankfully you can't do that. That was back in the day, they allowed married couples to consolidate their student loans together. And what a holy hell of a mess that was. They're still trying to figure that out, right? There are people that did that that was a bad idea, right? Don't do that, right? And you could probably do that with a private loan refinance, but don't. That is not it. That is a terrible idea. So throw that one out and keep your loans separate from each other. If it makes sense for you to both use an income-driven plan and file your taxes jointly, great. If it makes sense for you to file separately and use different repayment plans depending on what your respective incomes are, do that. But do not combine your loans in any way, right? That would be a really, really bad idea, particularly if you both have federal student loans now. That's the most beneficial scenario you can get, right? Both having eligible federal student loans that can be considered for income-driven plans or public service loan forgiveness is the most flexible position you can be in, right? Anything that you do other than that will move you away from that flexibility, right? And that flexibility is extremely powerful, right? Now, thankfully, again, you cannot consolidate spousal loans together under the federal system. You used to be able to do that. But the only way that you could do that now is using a private loan, and I wouldn't do that, right? That would include putting your loans into like a home equity loan or something, right? I wouldn't do that. Again, you're taking more beneficial, more flexible loans and replacing them with less flexible, less beneficial loans.
This is a good one here. I was told once that if we were to go on unpaid maternity leave or take a year off or something for whatever, we could call our servicer to switch our income to $0 to have the payment, the PAYE payment, appropriately reflect that. Can Dr. Bartels speak to this?
Absolutely. That is excellent advice, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that brings me to my deferment slide, right? Because the temptation is to defer your loans, right? If you go on unpaid leave, right, if you don't have any income, you submit to have your payment adjusted downward. So I'm going to come back to the student aid website here, right? And under the manage my loans, there is a recertify income driven plan payment option, right? And if you ever experience a decrease in your income, you come back to here and you have them recalculate your monthly payment, right? You don't have to wait for your annual recertification window. You recalculate your monthly payment. And if your current income is 0, then they'll calculate it down to 0, right? Which is essentially the same as a deferment, but it's more beneficial because the interest that accrues will not get added to your principal. It will not capitalize, right? And you'll preserve the forgiveness time ticking towards forgiveness in case you reach it, right? You want to reach it sooner rather than later. But the biggest benefit is preventing that unpaid interest from getting capitalized. And then once you're out of that low income scenario and you renew your income documentation again, the payment will go back up, right, to whatever your income and family size says it should go up to. And it'll prevent that interest from getting added to your principal.
How much in the future should we be considering when running these simulations?
How much in the future? Well, I would say I would look at it in chunks, right? So I would look at the first year, right? That's kind of how we have it laid out. What are my first year payments? What are my next couple of years of payments? What are the first 5 years of payments, right? Beyond that, it's really hard to know what's going to happen, right? But you should be rerunning a simulation every year, right? So when you file your taxes, right? When you have to renew your income for an income-driven repayment plan, run a repayment simulator, right? Run a new one that has your best guess of what your income projection is going to be for you and your spouse, right? And rerun the numbers and see what it shows, right? As you start to build a forgiveness savings plan, if you're on a forgiveness track, right? As that amount increases in your forgiveness plan, right? You can see how that will impact your remaining forgiveness savings, right? So you want to look at the big picture, right? Which is the whole thing, but I'm also looking at the next year's payments, the next 2 years payments, the next 5 years payments. I want to have an idea of the kind of cash flow flexibility that I'm talking about generating, right? And lining that up against my budget so I can see, can I increase the amount that I'm contributing towards my 401k? Maybe I hit 10,000 last year. I'm going to see if I can hit 12,500 this year, or I'm going to hit 15,000, or I'm going to try to hit the IRS maximum, which was 20,500 for this year, right? So that's what I'm looking at, right? Kind of the immediate impact, the first couple of years. I'm going to look maybe at the next 5 years. I'm going to look at the total impact, but every year I'm going to keep updating this.
We have a follow-up question to the earlier question about calculating your average interest rate, calculated one that seems to be different than what student aid is telling me. Follow-up question is, which is if the 0% pandemic rate is being used in place of the actual rate of the net weight average rate calculation?
I'm not sure I'm following that one.
If the 0% pandemic rate is being used in place of the actual rate in the net weight average rate calculation.
Yeah, in the My Student Loans tool, it sure is, right? I mean, and maybe in your student aid portal, it's a little different. I don't know, but I know that again, I know that if I pull my file and I upload it into the My Student Loans tool, my interest rates will all show 0. Right? When I go into the student aid portal here and I go through the consolidation process, right? When it pulls my loans, it shows the interest rates. Right now, if yours aren't showing interest rates, right, then I'm not sure why that would be. Right? But when you get through the consolidation here, it should show you a weighted average that is made up of these interest rates that are behind your loans. There is no scenario where your loan interest rate is 0 forever, right? I know that I wish that could be the case, right? But it ain't gonna happen.
If you
right?
can figure out how to lock that in,
Yeah,
let us
right.
know.
Exactly. So they will get turned back on, and they will be at the rates that we shared with you earlier that were dictated based on the loan types that you took at the time that you took them, right? And if you consolidate them, they will calculate a weighted average. Right now, you know, it may still show 0 after the consolidation goes through, because again, the pandemic forbearance benefits are still in place, and that's how they administer that. They set the interest rates to 0. But after that expires, there will be a weighted average interest rate behind the scenes there that your loans will reflect once that pandemic forbearance is over. Right. So I'm not really sure how else to answer that one. I'd probably would just have to see your loan details, and you know, maybe we can work through that over on the student debt message board.
Can we leave out HPSL and I think this is supposed to be the loans for disadvantaged students from a consolidation? What benefits do we lose when we consolidate? Can we still apply for deferment or forbearance?
Oh man. So yeah, this is kind of this kind of takes me back again to the wheeling and dealing, right? And unless the only scenario where it makes sense to keep your health profession student loans or loans for disadvantaged students outside of a consolidation, if those are the only loan types that you have, right? If those are the only loan types that you have, then you can't consolidate them. You actually have to have a direct loan or an older FFEL program loan in order to actually do a consolidation. So if you don't have any loans other than health profession student loans and loans for disadvantaged students, then that would be the only scenario where you shouldn't consolidate those loans. Right? Because you're not, the benefits you're gaining outweigh the benefits you're losing of those loans. In simplification of your loan portfolio, in the ability to put them all subject to the income-driven repayment plans, in the ability to make them eligible for public service loan forgiveness in the event that your career takes you that way, right, or continues that way, right? So there is really, I mean, it would be a really, really, really specific, unique situation that I haven't seen yet that would have me recommend that you leave that outside of a direct consolidation loan. And if you want to test that, if you want to see if you're that person, then post it on the student debt message board area and let's see if that's the case, right? But if you have other direct loans and you have health profession student loans and loans for disadvantaged students, then you really, really want to think about consolidating those.
Are there any notable benefits or consequences for pay and or IBR for new borrowers? My entire balance is eligible for either, and the consolidation application shows the same repayment estimate / metrics for both as well.
What was the first part of that question again?
Any notable benefits or consequences for pay or IBR for new borrowers?
In terms of the consolidation? Oh, wait, so you're saying income-based repayment 2014 versus pay-as-you-earn. Is that what we're asking about?
That would be my suspicion. It just says IBR on here, but I'm
yeah, okay. So yeah,
for IBR 2014.
Yep, that's a good question. So if you're eligible for, right, so you'll either be eligible for the old version of IBR or the new version, never both, right? So the new version of IBR kind of works similar to pay-as-you-earn, where if your first loan that you took was after July 1st, 2014, then you'll be eligible for IBR 2014 instead of IBR 2009. Right now, IBR 2014 works almost exactly the same as pay-as-you-earn, right? And I have yet to see a scenario where somebody would be eligible for IBR 2014 and not pay-as-you-earn. it's really hard for me to envision a scenario where that would be the case. So chances are you're eligible for both. And if it comes down between those two, you want to choose pay as you earn, right? Because pay as you earn has one provision in it that makes it better than IBR 2014. And that is, in the event that you had a significant unpaid interest balance and you fell out of what they call partial financial hardship, pay as you earn prevents or caps the amount of unpaid interest that can get added to the principal, right? So it's an insurance against how much interest can get added to the principal. Now that is an extremely rare event, right? That's kind of like, I was using income-driven repayment, I won the lottery, and I reapplied for pay as you earn again, right? So that is an extremely rare event for anybody to fall outside of partial financial hardship. Now, in the event that that happens, pay as you earn will cap the amount of the unpaid interest that can get added to the principal balance. IBR does not, right? So the full amount of the unpaid interest would get capitalized or added to the principal if you fell out of this partial financial hardship, which again, almost never happens, right? So, but in the event that that happens, pay as you earn provides some protection on the amount that gets added to your principal, right? But again, if you think about the I won the lottery scenario, my student loans really aren't an issue anymore anyway. So choose pay as you earn. It's that little bit better than income-based repayment 2014.
Okay. And we're at the 2.5-hour mark, so I want to be respectful of everybody's time.
Sorry about that.
Well, there's so much to go into.
I know, right? Oh, God. So these are my non-negotiables, right? So emergency funds, right? 3 to 6 months, at least probably 6 months of your expenses, right? So build a budget, figure out what your new monthly expenses are, multiply it by 6, that's your emergency fund target. If you have credit card debt, again, there was an outside size number of you that did 20 to 25% are carrying a credit card balance, pay that off first. If you have private loans, pay those off first, right? Those are the ones that you want to pay more aggressively first. As soon as you're eligible for a retirement savings plan, right, particularly through your employer, start saving for it, right? Start allocating at least 10% of your gross income towards those retirement savings plans, if not 15. If you have access to a health savings account with your health insurance, right, you want to max those contributions out every year, right? You don't pay tax on them going in, you don't pay tax on them going out, and you get to experience growth tax-free, right? Retirement plans, there's going to be a little bit of guidance that you're going to want to seek out in terms of, should I do a Roth? Should I do a traditional? What if I have access to a 401k? Can I do a Roth and a 401k? I mean, that can get pretty confusing pretty fast. But the concept is you want to make sure that you're maximizing your access to those particular retirement savings options as soon as possible. The time is critical to those, right? The longer those funds are in there, the longer they have the opportunity to grow tax-free, the more you're going to have later in life, right? Your future self will thank you for that, right? Some of them are also going to have tax benefits on the front end, which will reduce your adjusted gross income, which also will reduce your monthly student loan payments, right? So generally, the same people that don't want to pay any more than they have to towards their student loans also don't like paying taxes, right? Some of you, not you particularly, those of you that have been in repayment before you, who are really hell-bent on paying their student loans off sooner rather than later, are also paying more in taxes than they have to, because they're leaving things like their 401ks and HSAs on the table, so they have more money in their paychecks to pay towards their student loans, which means they're paying more in taxes than they have to, right? So there's a lot of things that you have to consider here before you pay more than your income requires towards your student loans, right? That can help reduce your taxes, help increase your overall savings and long-term wealth, right? That go way beyond your student loans. The sooner you can get into a home, I think the sooner you are going to experience wealth building as well. I think home ownership is one of the cornerstones to building wealth in this country. There are some really interesting analyses out there about, not buying a home and just paying rent and putting the difference into, long-term savings and things like that. But, ooh, man, it's hard for me to see that comes out ahead versus home ownership. But home ownership requires cash, right? And the sooner you can get to it, the quicker you can experience some of the appreciation that helps with that wealth building. So yeah, it's hard to think about waiting. I mean, if I think myself, if I go back to, if we took the approach of paying our student loans down before we bought our home, well, not only would we be buying a more expensive home, but we would have missed out on all of the growth in our home value so far, right? So, I mean, the sooner that you can get a lot of these things to happen for you, the better you're going to be in the long run, right? And that means that you're going to have to maybe take a longer term vision on your student loans than you may have initially been thinking. If you're going to manage your student loans using an income driven plan and you're going to hit forgiveness, then make sure that you're saving for that forgiveness as well. When it comes to retirement savings, right, here are the limits, right? So these are some pretty big numbers. See if you can get to them and see if you can actually take advantage of multiple of them, right? If you have access to a 401k and it's all traditional 401k contributions, you may be able to maximize those and start a Roth IRA and maximize those, right? And there are certain instances, right? If you're married and you file separately, you're going to lose the ability to contribute to a Roth IRA. And so there's a lot of there's just a lot of holes, right? So you kind of have to just push the buttons and see which ones you're eligible for based on what your tax filing status is, what your marital status is, what access you have to employer plans versus not. All of those things are going to go into your overall financial plan, but they can help to improve your tax status, your loan repayment status, and your long-term savings. Putting values on these things, right, because they will impact your adjusted gross income. This is a concept I call stacking incentives, right? If you maximize your ability to contribute to traditional 401k, which would be $20,500 in the 2022 year, you would decrease your taxes by about $5,000 and you would decrease your student loan payments by about $2,000 for the year, right? So this is where knowing how these things interact, combine in your favor, and taking advantage of them really help with the available money that you have to grow your overall wealth and keep more of your earnings. Signing bonuses, right? So the signing bonuses are new for veterinarians and you guys are receiving them, right? But make sure that you're clear on what those signing bonuses require of you, right? If they require you to work for your employer for a specified period of time, then make sure you're past that specified period of time before you spend a good chunk of that signing bonus, right? Because some of those signing bonuses have some clawback provisions in them, right? If you leave your employer, in the first 6, 8, 12 months, they may require you to pay all that back, right? And you want to be prepared to pay that back, right? So before you spend all of that signing bonus, you may want to allocate some of that into that emergency fund that you would use to pay that back if you left before you satisfied that employment period, right? So just be a little careful with those. There's no scenario where I would use those signing bonuses to pay extra towards my student loans, right? Again, my student loans are going to go away one way or the other, right? I'm going to use that money to help shore up these other critical areas of my financial wellness first. When it comes to home buying, 20% down if you can get it, right? If you're paying on a standard 10-year plan payment, right? And that's occupying a good chunk of your cash flow, the bank may not lend to you, right? Because you're pretty risky. A lot of your cash flow is already going towards your monthly student loan payment, right? So instead, you may want to pay based on your income to keep the payment down so you look like a better borrowing candidate to the bank, right? This has been my experience with the homes that we've purchased, right? I have never had a lender ask me about my student loans. And we have $400,000 of student loan balance, right? They care more about what your cash flow is, what your credit history and credit score shows, and how much of your income is dedicated to monthly expenses, right? So if you are paying a lion's share of your income towards your student loans, you may think you're doing the right thing, but the bank is going to look at you like, wow, you're one bad accident away from not being able to pay this mortgage you're applying for, right? So just be careful, right? You can use these things to your advantage if you choose to take advantage of the structures that are in place. Okay, what other questions you guys have?
Got a really good question here about when you start the consolidation process. Is there a way to check the status of it, or do you just wait around for the email?
Yeah, you're gonna have to wait around, unfortunately. It shouldn't take, if it gets beyond 30 days, I'm gonna start calling and asking questions, right? But it should get processed, or you should receive something after 30 days, if not sooner. And if I haven't, then I'm going to start asking questions. I'm going to start making calls to the Department of Education or the Ombudsman or whoever my loan servicer was that I chose to see if they received any indication of my consolidation. But I'm going to start asking questions after 30 days.
Okay. And if I spend 3 years in the repay plan and then switch to pay because I get married, does my time reset, or do I get 3 years towards pay?
Yeah, your time will not reset. Switching plans will not reset the time frame. However, I mean, that's cool. I mean, maybe your simulation shows that you should do that. You may want to start out in pay, right, rather than repay there. But that would depend on the specifics of your circumstance. I mean, if you know that you're going to have to switch, then you probably would want to start with the more flexible plan first. But again, you may have some circumstances there where that makes sense. So,
all right. And to clarify, if we're doing an internship in residency and during that training, we will have a debt to income ratio of 4-to-1, but we'll be making a specialist salary immediately out of residency, which is 300 to 400,000. So income exceeds debt. We choose repay now to have during internship, residency, and post training. And this is regardless of spouse's income / filing status.
Yeah, well, so you got to think through that, right? So marriage brings an interesting wrinkle into the advanced training calculation, right? So if you're going to be married during the advanced training, right, then your payment towards your student loans will be based on your combined incomes, right? Because if you're using repay in anticipation of having that debt to income ratio less than 1 after your specialty training, right, repay doesn't allow you to separate your income from your spouse. So your payment towards your student loans during the specialty training may be a little higher than you were expecting, right, depending on what your spouse's income is, right? So depending on how much you think the financial strain might be for you during that specialty training, right, you may consider using pay as you earn just to assure that that payment stays low during that specialty training, right? So that's going to depend on the specifics of when you're married, if you're married during that training, what your spouse's specific financial circumstances are, and what your budget shows in terms of helping you navigate that specialty training period, right? But if you have the financial wherewithal and the confidence that you're going to successfully navigate the internship, residency, specialty board certification, and receive that income that you're talking about on the backside of that, which will be less than your income will be greater than your debt at that point, then you can use repay for the duration of that training and you'll pay less in total towards your student loans ultimately, right? But if anything changes during that calculation, then I would be jumping into pay as you earn pretty quickly.
All right. And if for some reason you end up getting injured on the job and are out of work but live on disability insurance monthly payments, would the disability money be used to calculate my salary / monthly payments, or would the payments become $0?
It depends, right? It depends on whether or not your disability income is considered taxable or not, right? So that's a more complicated question than we can answer here, right? So some disability policies pay out taxable income, some of them pay out non-taxable income. Disability, depending on the severity of the disability, you could have your loans discharged, right? So disability is also a reason to pursue a discharge of your remaining student loan balance. So it could be that your student loans would be discharged, Worst case scenario, your monthly payment would be based on the taxable income of that, any disability income, right? If there was no taxable income, then your payment would be zero.
All right. And with that, I turned into a pumpkin. Thank you to
Yeah.
our 50 attendees who are hanging out with us to the end. You guys are rock stars. Tony, do you have any other further comments that you want to make sure that gets out to our attendees here?
No, I mean, I really hope that you guys take advantage of the consolidation, take advantage of the student debt message board areas to go through your specific circumstances. If you want to talk through those before, during, or after the consolidation period, stay plugged in to the changes that are ongoing with student loans. Again, most of them have been more beneficial. So you want to make sure that you're setting yourself up to maximize for all of those benefits to the extent possible. Resist the temptation to pay more than your income requires towards your student loans. There are way better things that you can do with your income, and you'll way outgrow your student loan balance by taking advantage of those things sooner rather than later, right? So if you have any questions about any of that, or you think you've got a reason why you shouldn't do that, or you want to challenge any of this, feel free to post on the student debt message boards or reach out via email, and we can work through all of those questions, comments, issues as well.
All right. Well, thank you very much. Thanks, everyone. We hope that you learned something this evening. I know it was a rather meaty presentation, and there's probably lots that you wish to revisit. So don't forget that the recording will be sent out to you via your email over the next couple of days.
Great. Well,
thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Rebecca, too, for moderating, and everybody else here behind the scenes that are helping with the Q&A and making all of these things come together and work. So please let us know what we can do to help in your in your future career endeavors.